Thank you, Lindsay. I enjoy so much working with you every year. And next time we work together, I'm going to have you just say, and here's Becky. So welcome everyone, and thank you so much for taking your Friday morning to join us for this training. We're going to get started right away because it is a very full 3 hours worth of content. And I know I was telling Lindsay and the other members of the team earlier that my hopes and my goal in presenting this training is I would say that there are not many on here today that it's a first time to hear about ACEs and trauma informed. So we're going to cover that just a bit, but this training is meant to be a deeper dive to literally help you change school culture from moving beyond trauma aware to embedding these principles into your school culture. And I've had the joy of working with several school superintendents regionally and seeing transformation happen in their districts over the last few years. So with that, if you want to buckle up, we are ready to roll. So appreciate Molly. She's going to help me out when we get to a video just to make the videos show and play a little bit more clearly. And we'll get into it here. All right, so in the first module here, we're going to talk about why you as an educator need to know about trauma, what trauma is, how to identify trauma. Trauma's like the wind. You don't really see the wind. What you see are the effects of the wind. And then we're going to talk about universal prevalence of trauma, understanding the ACEs study, and then some new information that I'm including in many of my trainings about building resilience. All right, so why do you, as an educator, need to know about trauma? Well, according to the National Child Traumatic Stress Network, which is one resource that I use throughout my training, 1 out of every 4 children attending school has been exposed to a traumatic event that can affect their learning and behavior. Some of the ways that this can show up in the classroom is lower grade point averages, increased school absences and chances for dropout, higher incidences of suspension, expulsion, and a decrease in students' reading ability and reading ability. Oops, looks like I have a typo. All right. So when schools understand the content that we're sharing today, you can now become safe, supportive environments where students make a positive connection to adults. And I want to let you know today that this is not a one size fits all. I grew up with many siblings, and I'm wedged between 2 sisters, an older sister and a younger sister. And my life story growing up was hand-me-downs. And, you know, it was kind of one size fits all. Well, I want you to know today, educators, that when we get into the last hour of the training, I'm going to give you a buffet of strategies. And I would really love to think that as this content's going out, that you're going to look at a couple of these strategies that where could we get started? And so, you know, if we have people from Greenville here, Cookville, you know, it may be different in Greenville where we're going to start is compared to Cookville. So it may look different at each school. And so becoming a trauma sensitive school, there's not a wrong or a right approach. It's just a journey. And so we're going to give a lot of strategies, not with the expectation that immediately you begin to implement them all, but just to get started and to give you some ideas of where to go next. And this is to help us have a shared definition of what it means to be a trauma sensitive school and what you can bring as educators and working with parents and policymakers to have a common vision. And, you know, as I start this today, I was thinking as we were leading up to this training and my preparation, you know, I wanted to start this training with a big thank you. You know, I was working in healthcare regionally when COVID-19 really began to impact communities in 2020. And I know healthcare in our region has really, you know, emerged the workers, the nurses, the administrators to work in some tough and changing situations. But you know what? I just want to really give a shout out and applaud you educators. Man, I have seen videos that have brought me to tears of educators driving by some of the streets to wave at children, and some of the creative things that you guys have put into place overnight to go virtually and then go back to being in person. And so I just really want to give you a heartfelt thank you this morning for the great work that you're doing. And many of the schools that I've partnered with trauma sensitive education, you know, they've told me that having that background and this understanding has been such a plus in working and navigating COVID-19. All right, so as an educator, I don't need to come on here today with a peer edited research article to tell you what your gut already knows. Your children, your students' lives outside of school matters. So what is this training about? Well, you know, knowing the story of trauma is not as important as understanding the effect of the trauma on the child. You know, as educators, sometimes you may know a family story, but the trainings that I present is not at all about learning a particular child's story. What this training is about today is to help you build skills to focus on the lingering effects of the story's impact, of what the trauma could bring into the behavior that is sabotaging a child and their effects to flourish in education. And so this training today is not about trying to know what children might be having traumatic incidences, though you may know that. And sometimes that could be important, but this is on building skills to deal with this story's lingering effects. All right, so what is trauma? Well, SAMHSA has defined trauma with 3 E words. An individual trauma results from an event, a series of events, or set of circumstances experienced by an individual that are physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening that can have lasting adverse effects on the individual in many ways: their mental, physical, social, emotional, and even spiritual well-being. Well, I kind of find that a little bit much to digest, so let's break it down 1 E at a time. All right, so the potential traumatic events, if we were in a in-person training today and had a little bit longer of a session, you know, we might be able to have Post-it notes and markers and all those wonderful things that we can't wait to do when we meet in person again. But I could ask you to help me to fill in this category. You know, what are the types of abuse? What are types of chronic stressors or loss? And another thing I want to bring out in today's training is somewhere along the way in my training, you're going to possibly hear your own story. And many of us are trauma survivors ourselves, many of our coworkers, and many of the families and the children that we serve. And so throughout the morning, as we cover some topics, domestic violence and sexual abuse, and these things are touched on, you know, if at any time you need to step away, get a drink of water, you know, feel free to do so, because the overarching goal of trauma-informed care is do no harm. And so the last thing we want to do is ever make anyone feel uncomfortable with the content. So when we talk about potential traumatic events, we may see our story there. And so some of these situations are the story of what our children and our school and our classrooms are facing, and violence in the home, or chronic stressors of poverty, invasive medical procedure, family members with COVID, or community trauma, historical trauma, and family members with addiction or alcoholism, or family members incarcerated. And then things like death or natural disaster that can impact. You have students that I'm sure family members are in the military and deployed. You know, one of my closest friends, her husband is a retired nuclear sub-commander, and she talked about, as they were raising a family of many children going from military base to military base, that when her spouse was going to be deployed, how that they came around and talked to the families about how they could support them in extra ways, because now the children were going to be separated from a parent for several months. So there are many different type of events that could be potentially traumatizing. All right, the second E of trauma is the experience of the actual event. And it can be impacted by how did it happen? When did it happen? Where and how often? So you and I can experience the same event and it might be traumatizing to me, but not to you. And a lot of that can be determined by whose hands or in what setting did these events occur. And when I worked for the police department, when I first learned about ACEs and trauma in 2014, I had some wonderful conversations with the child crimes investigators. And, you know, they told me that statistically, most child crimes occur at the hands of individuals the children know, that it's almost a rarity for children to be abused and molested through the hands of people that children don't know. And just to be real frank, a lot of times if there's addiction involved in the home, that children can be abused by people that frequent the home around their caregiver's addiction. So those things can impact when what is supposed to be providing you a sense of safety in life through your home setting, when that becomes a place that's dangerous, that can definitely have an impact on trauma. Okay, the third E of trauma is the effects of trauma. Now, this is very important for you as an educator to understand that some of the behaviors that we're going to discuss, these are symptoms or adaptations to trauma. And so oftentimes the effect of trauma on a child or a family can be conceptualized as a normal response to an abnormal situation. Again, when I was learning about this, working at the police department, I oversaw a program that worked with felony offenders with addictions to help them reduce recidivism. And in that journey, I heard many stories of trauma. You know, professionals, none of us pick where we start in life. And though trauma is not an excuse for drugs or crime, the ACEs study helped us to learn that it is a significant risk factor to choosing risky behaviors such as drug use. And I heard stories of individuals who were born to the home of a mother who is a heroin addict, and their youngest memory as a child was pulling their mother out of the toilet after she would shoot up because she'd get violently ill, and her older sister screaming across the house, let her drown, let her drown. And, you know, I said to that individual, you know, I'm so sorry that was your story of your childhood, because professionals, who would pick that to be a description as a childhood? And so to someone living in that situation, that's all they've known. And so trauma now and adapting to trauma is a normal situation. So some of the things that trauma can, the behaviors that are characteristic of trauma. A few years ago, I was training about 200 regional school nurses, and they're all shaking their head up and down on this slide, because you know what? Every school nurse and guidance counselor knows there's going to be the frequent flyers every year with the headaches and the tummy aches. And sure, there are headaches and tummy aches, but now when we put on our trauma-informed lens, we might know that maybe there's domestic violence in the home. Maybe there's a addicted father that didn't come home last night, didn't come home all week. And so what the children are coming to school with, a lot of it's really been navigating problems that are going on outside of school. So look at this list, and these are some behaviors that can be very connected to children experiencing trauma. Over or under reacting to sounds, bells, doors, physical contact, violating personal space. That as educators, we learn not to take these behaviors personally, but to realize they're sending us a message. All right, so the universal prevalence of trauma, these are statistics right from the CDC and SAMHSA website. So 1 of every 4 children. So just looking at the numbers of attendees today, you represent thousands of children from Middle Tennessee to East Tennessee to even some guests that are joining us from other parts of the nation and around the world. And so, you know, to think about 1 of every 4 children attending school has been exposed to a traumatic event that can impact their learning in your classroom. In 2017, suicide was the 2nd leading cause of death for children ages 10 to 17. Actually, the CDC calls this anomaly death by despair. And so as educators, you have the opportunity to help bring hope into the lives of children who the greatest travesty of trauma is where it strips kids of having any hope. And so we see here these high suicide rates. And on the national trauma campaign that I serve on, there are grave concerns about children being separated from you because of COVID, because for many kids, you are a lifeline. You're the positive relationships and role models in their life. And then nationally, statistics, 3.5 million to 10 million children witness violence against their mother each year. And I know from working with police, the reason there's a widespread in those numbers is it takes 7 acts of violence before a victim will reach out to an advocate program or a shelter. Now, they will reach out to police before 7 acts, particularly if it's harming and physically harming and violent. But there's much unreported violence in the home that children are witnessing. And then these children come into your classroom and they're navigating this very complicated life away from your classroom. 1 in 4 girls, 1 in 6 boys are sexually abused. And this is just so powerful to me. 94% of children involved in juvenile justice in one study that SAMHSA conducted, the common factor was childhood adversity. You know, if I was on this training today and I was sharing with you 94% of the way that people could you know, be cured of cancer or COVID, you know, this would be like Nobel Prize stuff. But look at this, how that almost all juveniles involved in the justice settings have histories of adversity and trauma. All right, so this first video that Molly's going to cue it up is a quick overview of the ACEs study.
What does your parents' divorce have to do with your risk for heart disease? If your mother had a drinking problem when you were growing up, are you more likely to suffer from depression as an adult? Here's what you should know about ACEs. ACEs stand for Adverse Childhood Experiences, extremely stressful events that can happen to a child growing up. Some experiences are so stressful that they can alter brain development, as well as the immune system, increasing the risk of lifelong health and social problems in adulthood. The term comes from the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, landmark research that shed new light on the root cause of everything from stroke and liver disease to substance abuse and mental illness. In the late 1990s, an epidemiologist from the Centers for Disease Control and a preventive medicine doctor at Kaiser Permanente set out to understand the association between childhood experience and lifelong health. They asked over 17,000 people in the Kaiser Health Plan in San Diego about their health history, as well as difficult questions about their experiences growing up. Anda and Felitti tallied up 10 different kinds of adversity in this largely middle-class and college-educated population. They were stunned to see how common ACEs were. 21% of all respondents were sexually abused as children. 19% grew up with someone who suffered mental illness. 28% had been physically abused. And 2 out of 3 respondents had experienced at least one ACE. The researchers next looked at how someone's ACE score, or the number of adversities they experienced, related to a wide array of serious health and social problems. They saw that the more ACEs someone had, the greater their risk for poor outcomes compared with someone with no ACEs. Someone with an ACE score of 4 had twice the risk of heart disease and cancer. Someone with an ACE score of 5 had an 8 times greater chance of being an alcoholic. And those with an ACE score of 6 or more, on average, died 20 years earlier. With every major problem they looked at in the ACE study, the risk went up for each additional adverse experience in childhood. As Dr. Robert Anda says, what's predictable is preventable. It's important to remember that ACEs are not destiny. ACEs are a tool for understanding the health of a population as a whole. For individuals, an ACE score can be a tool for understanding their own risk for health and social problems and empower them to make changes for themselves and their children. ACEs tend to get passed down from generation to generation and are common across all income levels, races, and cultures. But increasingly, people of all different professions and backgrounds are coming together to discuss how ACEs affect their communities. They're finding new ways to treat and prevent ACEs. Many doctors are starting to screen their patients for ACEs as part of their medical history. More schools are becoming trauma-informed, considering the source of problem behavior when disciplining their students, instead of immediately suspending or expelling them. To learn more about interrupting the cycle of adversity and improving health and well-being for the next generation, please visit kpjrfilms.co.
Let's see, Molly, I don't see my slides back. Okay.
Becky, share now. Yeah, you're good.
Okay. Thank you. All right, thank you, Molly. Okay, so what did we learn in the ACEs study? And again, I know most of you, this isn't your first rodeo. Oops, hold on there. On hearing about ACEs. I don't know why. Just got to go with the flow here. Okay, so some of the things that were very important that we learned in the ACEs study, and most of you have seen the ACEs pyramid. This is just a little graphic that's arranged a little differently. Is that when a child or is having a foundation in life of adversity and toxic stress, that's going to lead to altered brain connections, or actually can really impact brain development, which is very important when children arrive at your classroom door. And then that is going to lead to poor learning, substance use, to stop these anxious thoughts and self-medicate through substances, early age tobacco, alcohol, and toxic relationships. And that's going to bring about poorer physical health, poor mental health, addiction. And I know, again, from working for police, when people get involved around addiction, it's going to be highly likely they're going to be involved with the justice system and incarceration. And so following that, we saw from the ACEs study that when someone answered yes, the 10 questions to the ACEs study were scrolling on the screen in that little video. It was 5 things. Did you see this in your home before 18? And 5 things, did this happen to you? And what they found when someone said, yes, I saw violence in my home. Yes, I experienced violence to myself. Yes, I lived in extreme poverty. Yes, I had a caregiver who was an alcoholic. And what they saw in the original ACEs study, when they surveyed over 17,000 people in the Kaiser Permanente health plan in California, was that when someone said yes, one of these happened, then there was a probability that they would also say that more than one occurred. And then what the study also showed is that when more ACEs were a part of a child's story, that these were same individuals that had health consequences, behavior consequences, and life potential consequences. So a great graphic that I really like to bring into my trainings comes from the George Washington Public Health University of Public Health, Milken College of Public Health. Dr. Wendy Ellis and some of her colleagues developed, called a pair of ACEs. Now, I'm a city girl, but I married a country guy from Arkansas. And when we visited his family on the farm in years gone by, I never had grown up eating animals that I had formerly had a relationship with or knew their names. I'll never forget one year when we were there at Thanksgiving and my father-in-law said, well, today we're having Tom the turkey. You know, I grew up, and how it got to Kroger under shrink wrap, I really never knew. And I never thought about it. But my husband will grow blackberries and tomatoes. He likes to dabble a bit in gardening because is his background. And one thing I've learned 36 years into marriage, if you don't have good soil, it's going to be hard to grow good fruit. And so look at this diagram. Do you have students in your community that are living in poverty, maybe experiencing discrimination or community disruption? You know, things have been flipped upside down during COVID, or maybe families that have been lost jobs due to, I mean, the restaurant industry and some of the services that have had to shut down due to try to curtail the spreading of COVID-19. So if these are the types of activities or circumstances in the soil, then it's very likely that then the fruit that's going to be produced can include substance abuse, domestic violence, homelessness, and incarceration. So the good news throughout this training is we're going to see that communities are learning how to change the soil, learning how to improve the soil conditions so that we can see an outcome change in the fruit. So healing begins again by resilience, and resilience is simply the caring support of others. And a wonderful quote that I like from the American Pediatric Journal is that research shows that positive childhood experiences buffer against the health effects of adverse ones, that the proactive promotion of positive childhood experiences for children may reduce risk for adult depression, poor mental health, and promote adult relational health. In my community, I've worked with an alternative school. They've been using trauma-informed concepts for 4 or 5 years now. And in the beginning, you know, thanks to Jill's help, who's on the call today, I was able to have a door open to train the juvenile judge in our community as well as her staff. And one of the things one of the staff was saying that they were seeing was now that this alternative high school was using trauma-informed approach, the juvenile justice side said the students that we have on our caseload that are attending that school, that they don't want school to be out for the summer. what had happened? Here we had an alternative school that saw a great increase in attendance, lower amount of discipline referrals, lower amounts of fights, more students earning. Actually, they went from 140 students, would have recovered about 200 credits in a year. The first year they were using a trauma-informed lens, they earned 1,155 credits. And what happened at school was children began to be inspired and have hope, because now that light was on in the educators' minds that some of the children were navigating very difficult things outside of school. You know, in the first year I worked with that school, one day the principal called me and she said, Becky, I've got a bright young student here, and this student is going to actually have to be expelled soon because their caregiver, who was an addict, is not bringing the child to school. And so when you're 15 and you can't get to school because of the lack of support in your home or the trauma of your caregiver's life, you know, what are you going to do? So she said, do you think you could find someone to donate a bicycle? So I contacted some wonderful friends of nonprofits and downtown merchants, and lo and behold, within about 2 hours, I had a bicycle. And so the man that was going to give the bicycle said, well, you want to pick it up? And I said, no, why don't you take it to the school and let your generosity and kindness touch the heart of this school and the principal and the young person. And so they did. And about an hour later, I got a text of a beautiful photo of this generous community member donating a bicycle to this young person so they can get to school, because once they get there, they're doing okay, but it's just the lack of support at home. Well, about 2 or 3 hours later, this donor, he texted me and said, you are not going to believe this. The bicycle just rode by my house, and he knew that it was the same bike because it had orange pedals. And he had given a very nice bike, not a hand-me-down bike, you know, but it was a very nice, about $400 mountain bike, and said that the bike just rode by my house and it's not the child on the bike. And lo and behold, the child had made the parent aware of this kindness of a stranger, and the parent had already come to school and stolen the bicycle. And then when the parent learned that the child told the principal what happened, now the parent kicked the child out. So now the child is not only transportationless, but now they're homeless. And so educators, you know, I just want to bring before you today, how are children going to thrive when that is the support system or lack of it? But this research shows that by positive experiences in our schools, that though trauma may be fact, it does not have to be fate. So how is resilient built? This is a 2-minute video from the Harvard Center Developing Child, and Molly's going to show it to you.
Resilience is not some magical quality. It's something that really can be built, even in difficult circumstances.
The key active core ingredient to building resilience are the relationships kids have to others who care about them.
Of course, families play a very important role, but nobody raises children in isolation. We have a huge amount of research to show the powerful impacts of teachers, coaches, other adults in the community with whom children have a chance to develop relationships, who play that critical supportive role of building resilience. As a result of responsive interaction, children build simple skills of coping and adapting. How to stop crying, how to regulate your behavior, being able to defer gratification.
You have an adaptive toolkit that allows you at moments of stress or challenge to bring out a number of potential skills that allow you to get through
it. As children get older, the sophistication of those skills increases. Being able to monitor situations, solve problems. The way we as a society can nurture the development of resilience is to help communities to pay more attention to building the capabilities of the adults who care for children and provide the supports they need to tip the scales toward more positive life outcomes.
And then when communities say, we want to be an active part of crafting the solution to really understand what's necessary to produce the resilience, that's when the ball gets rolling.
Resilience building, capacity building, is really in everyone's interest, and everyone reaps the benefits when we do that well.
Apologize for the sound on that. That actually is very, very quiet in the video, so apologize that it wasn't as loud as some of the others will be. Thank you, Molly. All right, so let's talk a little bit about resilience. And as the video, pointed out, that children learning to build resilience when they're coming into school, you might be the only resilient model that they're seeing. And so what are some desired protective factors? So for family, some of the things that the video talked about was having concrete support in time of need. You know, some of the schools that I've worked with, a couple that I've been involved with directly, when they had a parent night, and I know that with COVID-19, a lot of those things are not happening as they used to, but you know, I'm sure there's going to be a time they'll come again, or maybe you're finding some alternative ways to still connect with the parents. But we had some activities to help the parents learn how important it is to have a concrete support. And I like to define concrete support this way. You know, I have many acquaintances, wonderful colleagues in different fields that I've worked in my career. But who's the kind of people that you would call in the middle of the night if you needed help? You know, actually this week we navigated a difficult situation. My husband was in a wreck, and wasn't his fault, and his car was totaled, and we had to go to the emergency room and have some x-rays. And sitting there in that emergency room along from my sons, I texted two buddies that I knew were going to lift us up in prayer. And you know, so I saw in my own life this week, what does concrete support look like? And so that's something that's very important your families need to realize, and social connections and parenting skills. You know, some of the schools in the region now that are moving in their journey to become trauma sensitive, they're offering parenting skills and things, and you know, what used to be PTA meetings and opportunities when you're around parents, passing off some of this information to parents. And then putting a focus on personal resilience and the ability to help children develop social emotional competence, and then how to help caregivers foster nurturing attachment. And then this little video that's going to be shown is about 4 minutes, and it talks about community protective factors as well. And then we're going to discuss that, how as a school you can help prevent ACEs by helping parents learn about personal protective factors as well as community ones.
Hi, this is my neighborhood. I grew up in this building. This is a great community now, but it's had its share of problems. When I was a kid, our community had high unemployment, a lack of resources for families, and lots of kids hanging out with no adult supervision. You might have heard about adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. ACEs are traumatic events in childhood, like abuse and neglect, that can increase risk for future problems. But they don't have to. The good news is that ACEs and their consequences can be prevented. Take me, for example. I was at risk for ACEs, and despite all the things that put me at risk, some pretty incredible people helped make sure that I wouldn't become another statistic. Come on, I'll show you around. That's Jackson. He's a cool kid. His dad left when he was 2, and his mom works 2 jobs. I hang out with him every Thursday night and help him with his homework. Sometimes we grab ice cream. It's fun. Plus, he has another adult role model to learn from and trust. That's Mr. Martino. When I was a kid, he let me help him at the store sometimes after school when my parents were working late. He did that for a bunch of us. My dad actually found his job as a mechanic because of Mr. Martino. This helped our family in so many ways. Not only did my dad have a steady paycheck, which eased his stress about paying rent and buying necessities like food and clothes, but he was also a lot nicer to me, my brother, and my mom once he started working a job that made him feel good about himself. When communities come together, they can do so much to prevent ACEs. Mr. Martino and other local business owners put together a series of career workshops to help people like my dad find work. My mom also got a job with a company that allowed her to work from home and spend more time with me and my brother. Mariana has just gotten out of a class about handling challenges of single parenting. The clinic offers free childcare so Mariana's daughter, Ella, can play while Mariana's in class. The class helps parents like Mariana develop positive parenting skills, not just for babies and toddlers, but for teenagers too. This is another way our community has come together to give families the resources they need, and just one more way to prevent ACEs. This was my school, Riverside Middle, right in the heart of town. These kids are here for a sponsored summer camp. This community-supported program helps families with affordable, quality childcare and helps kids get tutoring and learn life skills. When I was a kid, I spent a lot of time at this school all year long. There was one counselor, Miss Greer, who I remember more than anyone. She was a really good listener. Miss Greer helped me and my brother get involved in after-school activities like baseball and soccer. Our coaches were super nice and were mentors to us. Staying after school for practice kept us and a lot of other kids out of trouble. When schools help take responsibility for preventing ACEs, everybody wins. My life could have gone in a completely different direction. Studies show that ACEs can have long-term negative effects on kids' health and well-being that may last into adulthood and even continue in future generations. But by people and groups taking action, ACEs can be prevented. In fact, there are 5 known strategies that help stop ACEs before they even start. You can implement them in your own community, just like we did. How? By strengthening economic support for families, by changing social norms to support parents in positive parenting, by providing quality care and education early in life, by enhancing parenting skills to promote healthy child development, and by intervening to lessen harms and prevent future risk. So, now you know my story, and you've seen the prevention strategies in my community that helped me beat the odds. I had healthy relationships with my family and friends. I learned how to take care of myself and make good choices. And today, I'm a mentor to other kids who need some extra help so they don't become an ACEs statistic. Safe, stable, and nurturing relationships and environments are essential to prevent child abuse and neglect and to assure that all kids reach their full potential. Are you thinking what I'm thinking? Banana split? You got it.
All right, thank you, Molly. All right, so let's talk about what that video showed us about community protective factors. So the gentleman that was narrating the story talked about the family support with the friends and the job training, the child care, when the mother went to parenting classes. But we can also encourage from a school setting community protective factors, safe schools, safe neighborhoods, stable and safe housing, access to nutritious food and employment, access to medical care. The alternative school that I have been involved working in a second year, they worked with a local medical group to have a doctor to come by a couple of times a month because they realized students were not being taken to the doctor. And I know many schools have a medical setting with a nurse and all, but these are some things that we need to think about. How can we strengthen families where the children are coming to our school through some of the community connections? And then transportation, access to affordable and high quality childcare, and then inclusion and equity related to all races, ethnicity, or disabilities. And so The next two slides are touching stories from two young men. First is going to be Chad. And the reason I like to include this in my training is because Chad's story took place where a teacher realized something must be going on in Chad's life. So she connected him to a coach or a mentor in the school, and you're going to hear Chad's story. And then Molly, without coming back to me, let's go to the next one, which is Josh's story. And so in Josh's story, you're going to see how when a tragic event of losing his father while he was in high school, how through the resilience that he created or developed in his life was largely through the support of his mother. So both of these are good examples of protective factors.
It's just hard with that. I mean, I was just a kid. Because here everybody knew our business, knew what was happening to us, and it was brutal. Oh my God, there's a school. If you go right up here, there's a turn, and you can situate it.
It's a tough thing back here.
Yeah. This is crazy. There were some good times though, we'd have a good 30 minutes or so before we heard the sliding glass door open. And one day he came in and he actually had pizza, like supreme pizza. And another day, it was fine. And another day he came in, for no reason, he just smashed my mom's head against that cabinet there. Just thinking of, just to the left of where they're playing, it's where my brother and I would play. My dad, he would come home and we had to be really good at sports and stuff, so. There's one time where we're sitting, I knew it was coming. I knew my brother, Bobby, I knew that he would be the one to bear the brunt of it. And so I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Chad reminds me of a lot of the kids that have come through here. Angry, very angry. And you could tell he just didn't want to connect with anybody. And you could tell he was hiding something. He always came in with a nervous stomach. My stomach hurts, my stomach hurts. And he finally came clean and told me his father had major anger issues. He said, I need to talk to somebody. And I instantly thought of Coach Morrow.
Chad wasn't a football player per se. He was just a kid that had energy that needed to do something. He needed to be a part of something because I don't think he had anyone as a role model or someone showing him what to do.
On the whistle.
Coach Morrow was the only person I really trusted in this town. He was always there.
Yeah. There was times I would give him a ride home. We would talk, sometimes we wouldn't talk. But it was interesting to have a discussion with someone, a young man who had no one to talk to.
He was the only one there for my graduation. Even my family wasn't there.
You're doing good.
You're okay.
I just remember when you were walking across, I just remember looking up. He had this big old...
just ear to ear grin.
It takes a village to raise a child. And it doesn't matter what nationality, what race, we're all from the human race. If you interact with someone, it shows them that you care.
Good memories, you know? Yeah. You gotta hold on to those.
It's love thy neighbor. It's what we should do.
When's the last time you saw him?
About 8 years ago. And actually, right over here is Lucille's barbecue. The best barbecue you'll ever have in your life. And Coach Morrow actually took me there, like after high school graduation. But take this right. It's gonna be your first right over there. Just pull in, not this one, but. I freaking knew it. I freaking knew it. I did too. I knew something was up. No, I knew something with that. I knew it. I knew you all were doing something.
No, you didn't. There he is.
Yeah. I heard you were in town. I knew you couldn't pass up some Lucille's, man. Oh, good to see you. I'm so proud of you. Done well. Done well.
From what I understand, his father passed away, and he would have pictures of him in his locker. Some students thought it would be a good idea to rip down those pictures and harass him and bully him for missing and loving his father.
Going through what I went through, you kind of keep to yourself. You don't know who you are or anything. You're just walking through the space, empty space. It's kind of like a puzzle. You're trying to find your way to the good things in life.
No one wants to be bullied. Everyone wants to feel like they mean something to somebody.
It's definitely a hard 4 years of your life, you know?
Even like a few words can affect someone so negatively.
I'd sit in the cafeteria alone. I wouldn't talk to anyone. Even if people invited me to sit with them, I didn't feel this was my place to be, you know.
Coming to a city school, a lot of people said, you're just going to make it worse. I didn't know what else to do for them. So yeah, we just took the jump. I was pretty scared, you know. I kind of thought the city experience, maybe a bigger high school rather than a small town high school, it just might be better.
I hope that attending the school, I would be treated like everyone else. Yeah, I just wanted to make it and just be a normal kid. I was sick and tired of being a no one. I wanted to be someone and I wanted to reach out to people and show who I was.
I just remember at first they called him the doorman. They thought he was weird.
It was definitely kind of weird. It took a while for people to adjust. But once people realized that he was continuing with it, it almost became something to look forward to in the morning. Like, you walk up the stairs and you know that Josh Yant's gonna be standing there with a big smile on his face saying good morning.
No problem.
The first few weeks when I started doing it, they were kind of shocked.
Good, you? Thank you.
Not many people hold doors, right? But after that, people started to open up to me. Opening a door is more than a physical act. It's about putting yourself out there, getting to know people, making them feel comfortable, making them feel welcome.
Thank you. No problem.
Opening doors, it gives people hope that people care.
I think that was his way of saying I'm here and I'm not going to be invisible anymore.
He had literally, just by holding doors and saying good morning, he had made a drastic change in his life.
It was definitely a positive effect. Like it made people want to do nice things for other people. Like he set a good example for other students.
Everything changed huge. I mean, everyone said it. All the teachers, the students felt it. They talked about it, you know, that he changed things in the school. And he was a changed Josh.
We were honored to have Josh. We were privileged. Any school would have benefited.
I think Prom King was a way to say thank you from the students and the staff. So when he won, it was like his moment to shine.
When we heard Josh Yant's name pulled out, it was like pretty much everyone should have just ran up there and been Prom King, because it felt like everybody won.
Yeah, he's standing tall and straight. He's got the big grin on his face and got the crown.
I never expected to get an award or anything like that. I was just happy enough to make it through.
Just 1 year and things are totally turned around, totally. And it would have been fine if the story stopped there. It could have, and it would have been okay. And he still would have been the same person.
All right, guys, so now is the moment. Let's all line up to the side of the room. Once we're all lined up quietly, we will head down to the gym.
I would have never thought he would be a public speaker because he had been so shy, but he took to public speaking like a duck to water.
He draws them in, and it's this aura, it's this personality that he exudes. He's been there, and so they relate to him in that respect.
When I'd heard your story, it kind of made me feel like I could be more like myself.
It changed the way I thought about things. It changed the way, how I felt about myself.
I personally think that you shouldn't let, what's going on around you affect your personality or the way you act.
I think he shows them just be courageous. You know, don't let the bullies get you down. Just, you know, fight back in your own way, maybe with a little kindness.
It's amazing how just one simple act can change your whole life. I never thought doing something so simple could be so rewarding.
Thank you, Molly. I think the sound got a little bit behind the video, but man, those are powerful, both of those stories, and true stories. Hold on. In building resilience, what two amazing examples in these two young men's lives, and how through a school setting, difficult situations, they were able not only to navigate, but to thrive. Something has popped up here. Okay, there we go. So we want to think about a beautiful metaphor that the Tennessee Building Strong Brains came up with in the working with a partnership with Frameworks, and that was a metaphor of charging stations. And so as we go in our journey to become a trauma-sensitive school, we want to think about what is it around your school that is a charging station. You know, last night when I was going to bed, my phone was battery on red or just a few % or whatever. But you know what? I didn't lose any sleep at all about it. I just plugged it in overnight, and when I woke up today, that battery was full. But educators and school administrators, coaches, all that are joining today, guidance counselors, we need to realize that many of the kids, when they come into our school setting, and many of their parents, when we interact with them, their batteries are not on green, their batteries are on red. And we also want to mention today about our teammates, that many of us, while we're in the middle of putting out and helping kids in this difficult setting with COVID-19, sometimes we have to talk about our own self-care, which we're going to talk about in a minute. So think about with Josh and Chad's story is how in a school setting can you create resilience? And to me, this is one of the most important parts, or at least it's my favorite, I think, in this whole conversation this morning in this training. And this is something that I have actually learned in my 6 years, going on 7 now, that I've been an educator and an advocate for trauma-informed practices. So when we talk about building resilient schools, which is the goal of this training today, and so appreciate Lindsay and all his support to bring us together for this conversation. Heretofore, when we knew we had kids in our school, we just jumped to the bottom because we knew that we needed guidance counselors and mental health for youth and mental health connections and services, which those are very important, very essential. But by becoming a trauma-sensitive school, now science shows us that in a funnel shape that I have here, that we can bring healing at some other levels as well. One of the school districts that I've been working with for a few years now, well, in the second year with a superintendent over in Marion, Virginia, the first year he had me to train all his principals, school administrators. I believe some of the school board were in that training. And then the next time I did a training for all the teachers. And in the first training, when the principals and the leadership were there, I started the training by asking them to do the very same thing as what I ask you at the beginning of this training. This training is not just about information, it's about change. And so when I trained the principals, I said, when we talk about strategies, write down 1 or 2 things that you want to begin to work with your staff on. So then I trained all the staff on the same thing. And then this year, I trained virtually the bus drivers, the custodians, the school secretaries, the school nurses, because the goal of creating a trauma-sensitive school is that we know through the welcoming, even like Josh with the door opening, we know that when a custodian is waving in the car line or maybe sitting with kids at a table at lunch, that there can be healing come to kids that have experienced trauma. And I believe over time, as more research is collected on schools that are doing dynamic things to become trauma sensitive, I think we're going to be able to show through data that maybe 50–60% of trauma the kids are experiencing is mitigated through just having a trauma-sensitive school environment. So all staff are trained in a training like what you're in today to understand trauma, to bring warmth and welcoming to the environment, to create a sense of safety. The programs do not re-traumatize students and create a committee for change at this upper level where all hands are on deck, helping to love and to care for the students that are in our charge. One of my favorite examples comes from the CBS News. And so the school year before COVID-19, one night I was watching the news and I heard a woman being interviewed who was a bus driver in Utah. And this bus driver, she drives a bus in a rural route in Utah, and she talked about how much she enjoyed her work. And that particular year, at the beginning of the school year, a little girl got on the bus and she just struck up a friendship with her. The little girl is very friendly and chatty, but every day this little girl got on the bus, she had beautifully manicured, braided hair. So a few months into the school year, one day the bus driver on a Monday pulled up to the stop and the little girl was not there. The next day, no little girl at the bus stop. The next day, same, all the way through the end of the week. The little girl was not on the bus. So the bus driver was a bit concerned and hoped on Monday she'd see the little girl. And much to her relief, on Monday when they pulled up to the stop, there was the little girl. And she got on the bus and the bus driver said, "Oh, I'm so glad to see you today. I missed you." And the little girl gave a little brave smile and went to her seat. But one thing the bus driver noticed, the little girl's hair was not braided. And she thought, well, maybe they overslept. Well, the next day, the little girl got on the bus and again, no braids. The next day, there she was, but no braids. So finally on Thursday, the bus driver said to the little girl, said, "Honey, I sure miss your braids." And the little girl looked down and through tears coming out of her eyes, she looked up at the bus driver and she said, "Last week, my mommy died. And my daddy doesn't know how to braid hair." And that bus driver was so filled with compassion and empathy that after she dropped the children off at school that day, she went to the Walmart and got a new hairbrush and a bag of bows. And when the little girl got on the bus that afternoon, she said, "Honey," she said, "from now on, stay on the bus a minute and I'm going to braid your hair." And professionals, I want you to know that act of empathy and kindness from the bus driver, that little girl began to get her spark back and her interest about school. And it was so noticeable that her teachers reported it to the principals. They wondered what had happened, that this little girl was beginning again to bravely engage in classes. And so they reported it up to the school superintendent, and it was reported on their local news, and then it was brought into national news. So that's the kind of healing that I'm talking about when a school begins to move in a direction of being trauma sensitive. Now let's talk briefly about the middle level. So we see still it's a larger part of healing than the bottom level, the mental health services, which again are important, but now in a trauma sensitive school journey, we see that the whole pattern can bring about healing. So what is the next barrier? That's focused on student success. How can we help students reduce toxic stress away from school? So what does that look like? Well, that could be access to case management, mentoring opportunities. When I worked for police, every year our local schools sent us a note and contacted me, and they said, we would love to have officers be lunch buddies that just showed up a few times a week to have lunch with a child because they saw the virtue in having children have that support. Or community navigators are available. And I don't have time to tell all the stories of schools that I've worked with, but regionally, some of our schools now are hiring social workers along with their guidance counselors. Some of the schools in the Southwest Virginia area are utilizing a nonprofit called Community in Schools. When I worked in healthcare, I helped to write a grant so that we could try to bring these positions to our school. And I'll tell you what, some of those community and schools workers are knocking it out of the park when they reach out to families that might be experiencing homelessness. When I worked again for police, the local school board told me that every year in our community school district, 300 to 400 children were classified as homeless. This didn't mean that they're living under a bridge, sleeping in a car, but what it means is they had no permanent address. So professionals, what if we could have some sort of service in our schools that helped kids and their families to connect? And as a community organizer and being involved in many of the things that I've done in healthcare and in policing, I have seen that in my town are many resources, housing opportunities, free dental care, free wellness checks, and many types of services that many in our community don't know about. And not only do I like to talk about this, but I like to walk the walk. So locally, I serve as one of the board of directors of our local Boys and Girls Club. So I met with our Boys and Girls Club director, who's just a wonderful friend. I met with her last fall. I'm the chair of our programming committee. So we discussed the idea, how could we bring this middle level to the kids in our Boys and Girls Club? So she tasked me with that. So starting this month in February through the end of May, we're going to have 8 sessions for 1 hour, 2 nights a month, where she can offer free childcare to the caregivers. And we're calling it family enrichment. And what we're doing is we're bringing Goodwill Industries in, and they're going to do job skill training, interview practicing, dress for success. And then we have wonderful partners with UT Extension who are going to teach a couple lessons on love languages for parenting. And I'm going to talk about protective factors. And then we have a wonderful credit union that's going to come and talk about financial literacy. And then I had a great sponsor who's given $1,500, and we're buying $100 gift cards so that everyone who completes 7 of the 8 classes is going to take a little shopping trip. And so what are we doing is we're going back to that CDC video where we think and we see how important personal protective factors are, as well as community. And so schools, you're a natural hub for these type of activities. But maybe, with all that you have going on, you can't host a job fair once a year. But you know what you could do? You could bring some flyers in when there is a local job fair going on, because in this middle level, we want to see how can we lift up our families. And again, these things really don't cost anything at all unless you bring on a social worker that really focused on this. And then we have behavioral health. So I call this the funnel of hope. And all of this in a trauma sensitive school environment is going to help our kids to thrive. All right, so when we partner with children and families, data shows that when parents are partnered with the educators, children are actually going to have better outcomes. And this partnership, we need to understand that all are doing their best. And we need to remember that traumatized children have traumatized caregivers. And we need to, because of that, we need to know that sometimes we're going to have to repeat information frequently. And then do we have mechanisms in place where families in need could find groceries or financial assistance, or how can they access these? So consider the school hosting job fairs, health or dental clinics. Some of the rural areas that I've worked with, you know, people don't have the public transportation, but they can find a way to get to the school campus. And so what if once a year, I know when I worked in healthcare, up here we have what they call RAM, which is a couple times a year, dental, eye services, medical. They'll go to a campus or a business location, and they'll have people lining up at 4 in the morning on these 1 or 2 days a year to access these services. But why is it such a success? Because they bring so many to one location. And the best part is that trauma-informed assistance is always, always offered in a non-shaming, non-judgmental way. All right, so on our section 2, we're going to get going in this, and then in a little bit take a break. We're going to cover how trauma affects brain development, how then it's obvious trauma can impact school performance, and then addressing learning during COVID-19. All right, so this video is about 4 minutes, and it's going to talk about brain development. Thank you, Molly.
Science tells us that the experiences we have in the first years of our lives actually affect the physical architecture of the developing brain. This means that brains aren't just born, they're also built over time based on our experiences. Just as a house needs a sturdy foundation to support the walls and roof, a brain needs a good base to support all future development. Positive interactions between young children and their caregivers literally build the architecture of the developing brain. Building a sturdy foundation in the earliest years provides a good base for a lifetime of good mental function and better overall health. So just how is a solid brain foundation built and maintained in a developing child? One way is through what brain experts call serve and return interactions. Imagine a tennis match between a caregiver and a child, but instead of hitting a ball back and forth across a net, various forms of communication pass between the two. From eye contact to touch, from singing to simple games like peekaboo. These interactions, repeated throughout a young person's developing years, are the bricks that build a healthy foundation for all future development. But another kind of childhood experience shapes brain development too, and that's stress. Good kinds of stress, like meeting new people or studying for a test, are healthy for development because they prepare kids to cope with future challenges. Another kind of stress, called toxic stress, is bad for brain development. If a child is exposed to serious, ongoing hardships like abuse and neglect, and he has no other caregiver in his life to provide support, the basic structures of his developing brain may be damaged. Without a sturdy foundation to properly support future development, he is at risk for a lifetime of health problems, development issues, even addiction. It's possible to fix some of the damage of toxic stress later on, but it's easier, more effective, and less expensive to build solid brain architecture in the first place. One of the things that sturdy brain architecture supports is the development of basic emotional and social skills, an important group of skills which scientists call executive function and self-regulation can be thought of like air traffic control in the child's mental airspace. Think of a young child's brain as the control tower at a busy airport. All those planes landing and taking off and all of the support systems on the ground simultaneously demand the controller's attention to avoid a crash. It's the same with a young child learning to pay attention, plan ahead and remember, and follow lots of rules. Like all of us, kids have to react to things happening in the world around them, while also dealing with worries, temptations, and obligations on their minds. As these demands for attention pile up, air traffic control helps a child regulate the flow of information, prioritize tasks, and above all, find ways to manage stress and avoid mental collisions along the way. Having this ability is a necessity for positive and level mental health. Developing effective air traffic control, overcoming toxic stress, and building solid brain architecture are things kids can't do on their own. And since strong societies are made up of healthy, contributing individuals, it's up to us as a community to make sure all young people have the kinds of nurturing experiences they need for positive development. To build better futures, we need to build better brains.
All right. So in that video, a couple things that we want to point out. Hold on a minute there. I feel like I can relate to many of you having to do all your virtual learning. It can have a few little glitches here and there. And in my case, it's definitely operator error. All right, so two important themes that video pointed out. You know, I'm so honored to be working with the ETSU Ballad Health Strong Brain Institute here at East Tennessee State University. And in learning about these concepts, here are many, many faculty in education and counseling and psychology and business and biology and chemistry and nursing in the School of Pharmacy. And they're seeing now the College of Medicine why this needs to be a part of professional training. For many of us, you know, we're far out there in our career when we're just learning about it. But now these concepts need to be part of training as we go into these areas. But one of the things that was so critical and pointed out in that video is the process of serve and return. So when a child is young, between the ages of 0 and 6, that's the time that the neural pathways in their brain are the most plastic or the most moldable. And the way that a child's upper part of their brain, the cortex, develops is through a process called serve and return. And so when serve and return, just think of it like a tennis match or ping pong, where a child makes a sound and a parent focuses on that and repeats the sound. You know, I never do a training without working in stories about my grandchildren. And so when my grandchildren are over here, they're just young toddlers, you know, Naomi, they call me Naomi. We're doing serve and return, whether we're playing with Matchbox cars or Hot Wheels or baby dolls. What are we doing? We're doing this back and forth. But as that video pointed out, this is an essential function for children to have their brain developed, the part of it that needs to come to classrooms to learn. And we know that sometimes, actually, the Centers for Disease Control says the most common form of child abuse is child neglect. And see, child neglect can happen in any home. There's no socioeconomic barriers or boundaries. Sometimes when children are not getting that personal, not screen time, but personal interaction with caregivers, then it could make up a deficit in their upper brain development. And so the video called the serve and return as building the bricks. So some of the things that are impacted by the upper part of the brain, which can come now into your school setting, if there's not the serve and return, is the working memory, mental flexibility, self-control, and it can impact and show up in schools as school readiness or a lack of school readiness, math and reading competence, job stability, positive relationships, and overall quality of life. So in 2019, when I worked for healthcare, they asked me to go to the Tennessee Senate Health Committee, where I presented just in a very brief overview why our local legislators, and I so appreciate the work of the Tennessee Commission because they are very involved in advocating with legislators across the state why they need to understand about ACEs. So this was one of my favorite slides that I took to that presentation. And it's an MRI of two different children, same age. One is labeled healthy healthy brain, one is labeled abused brain. If you'll notice in the healthy brain, the circled areas, how colorful that is. And those circled areas are the upper part of the brain, the cortex. And so that child's getting a lot of serve in return. And so that part of the brain is developing. But on the other side, we have a child that I would have probably labeled this a neglected brain. This is a child the same age in an orphanage in Romania. And I know from research that these orphanages often have 200-300 children and only maybe a dozen caregivers. So while the children are being cared for with food and clothing and shelter, but yet they don't have the one-on-one activity. So educators, you have children showing up in your classroom. One is healthy brain, one is abused brain. And science is right there in front of you, how that child with an abused brain is not going to bring to the classroom the abilities to learn. And this is not something that educators have been trained on in their professional education. And here's another way to point that out. So typical brain development develops upside down. So the survival part of the brain is the amygdala. All of us have an amygdala. We all need an amygdala. If while I'm out camping, a bear runs through the campsite, we did camp a lot when our boys were growing up. And one day, my youngest son and I took a trip to the restroom and we got much too close to a bear that was on our path. And so sometime after that, he was a little reluctant about camping again. And one day he said to me, he said, "Mom, I've just figured out when we're camping, if we see a bear, all I have to do is outrun you." And I said, "Well, I feel the love now, because I guess he thought I could be the bear bait." So all children, all of us have experienced a few times in life where we feel things could be overwhelming or our safety threatened. And so we need our survival mechanism. But by and large, we have comforting around us, nurturing around us, so that very quickly we return back up to the stage of our brain, the area of our brain, the cognition. But children coming into our classrooms that are living in situations the ACEs test described, they're coming in with the flipped upside down brain developed. And the good news again is we can bring this changes to this through things in our school setting. So one of the great things that I've picked up from Dr. Dan Siegel in a great book called The Whole Child Brain Workbook is a simple way you can emphasize brain development. One of the schools that I worked with, a high school, the principal told me that in helping her students learn about how the different areas of the brain cause behaviors, she said when a student has to come to her office for a fight or some attendance issue, she begins to talk to them. She draws behind her a little hand or a little house, and she gives them a little talk about upstairs, downstairs. So think about the upstairs brain as these four fingers. That's your cortex. That's where we do our learning, our emotional regulation, our big emotions come through there, our self-control. And then we have our thumb, which is the amygdala, when the bear runs through the campground, okay? So while you're listening to this training, your brain is like this. But literature says when the bear runs across the campground, this is what happens. Your cortex shuts down so your amygdala can go to work. This book here calls it flipping your lid. And so one reason why I'm teaching police officers is when we're using this part of our brain, the cortex, we have calm. But when we're using this part of our brain, the amygdala, that's where we see chaos. So educators, when you see calm, when you see chaos, immediately by understanding trauma-informed concepts, you know where a student is at in their brain. Now, this becomes very important. So when you have students that are dysregulating, having a meltdown, just blowing up like a little landmine, and you have no earthly idea what set them off. Educator, what you need to do is help the child climb from the downstairs into the upstairs brain, because that is where you're going to be able to reason with the child, problem solve. So when they're dysregulated, the first message you need to let children know is you are safe. You are safe. Now you're going to be on floor number 2 in the brain, and that's the emotional state or the limbic state, okay? I'm kind of giving you like the brain and coloring book version. I definitely don't make a claim to be a neurologist, though I'm going to be presenting to neurologists in the Detroit area coming up soon that are very interested in this same topic. So in our next floor of the brain is emotional. So what is the message you need to get? Is that I'm here with you. So first you're safe. I'm here with you. Now the child, bing, the elevator opens on the 3rd floor. Now we can find a solution. So teachers, when little people are overwhelmed by big emotions, it's our job to share our calm and not join their chaos. So trauma can impact school performance with lower GPA, higher rate of absences, increased dropout, more suspensions and expulsions, and decreased reading ability. Single events of trauma can impair learning. I do a training for juvenile judges, and in that training, they give case studies. And one of the case studies is a 16-year-old girl named Carmen. And Carmen's a junior in high school, and the school loves Carmen. She's been in the same district her whole school career, and now as a junior, the teachers are excited to have her. She's very pleasant. She does her work. She's very well behaved. She's successful in her grades. But all of a sudden now, Carmen is not turning her work in. She's distracted in class. And so after some visits with the guidance counselor or confides to the teacher, now they learn that Carmen's mother has a new boyfriend. And the boyfriend's also attracted to Carmen. So once in a while, the boyfriend is coming to the school office with full permission of the mother, checks Carmen out of school, takes her down the road and violates her in a nearby park. So now Carmen is not holding it together because she never knows on which day the boyfriend's going to show up. And the first time it happened, she told her mom, and her mom said, Carmen, we can't do without him because he's paying the rent. So educators, again, I want you to understand that these things that are going on probably have very little to do with your classroom setting. It's all about children navigating complex life outside of school. So chronic exposure during a child's early years can affect their attention, memory, cognition, reduce their ability to focus, interfere with problem solving and planning, and result in overwhelming feelings of frustration and anxiety. So what does trauma look like? Well, you may have a student on the playground that's all alone. It may not be that they're shy. It may be to them, it's a trigger when they're in a group. Maybe they've experienced bullying. Maybe they've been in a fight. Or the child that's disconnected, like Carmen I just told you about. Maybe they're thinking about the words that the dad's shouting at the mom while they're catching the bus. Or maybe the little child that's angry because of things that are happening at home, or the child that is hypervigilant. Because as I heard a story of a 15-year-old young man who a high school teacher told me was falling asleep in school, and she said, son, why are you so sleepy? And he said, because my caregiver is a heroin addict. And at night when they're partying, the people that come around the home, once my parent has passed out, I wake up with people coming in the room to violate me. And so this high school 15-year-old started sleeping in their closet, and the closet door didn't have a lock, but they put their feet up against the door so that when someone came in the room that was going to violate them in some way, at least they would be awakened. Educators, you know, to me, it just amazes me that the children that we serve sometimes are doing as well as they are when they have this kind of dysfunction at home. Here's a great slide from National Child Traumatic Stress Network. So when I'm training hundreds now and thousands of mental health professionals, we're just saying slow down maybe on that diagnosis to a 7-year-old of ADHD, because look at how much trauma behavior mimics ADHD. And when a little child is diagnosed with mental illness, you know, that can be another layer of trauma, is that I've got something wrong with me. And so we want to see there's a huge overlap there. All right, we're going to take our 5-minute break. I'm going to set a little timer and we will be back in 5 minutes. All right, Here we go. Buckle up again. Let's talk about some trauma-informed strategies while you're navigating COVID-19. Well, I have to begin with you as staff and school administrators. So let's talk a little bit about the physical and emotional well-being of staff. You know, let's in this COVID setting, we want to think about teachers and staff that are faced with professional stress. You know, all of a sudden methods have changed, learning new skills and technology platforms while assuring internet access to, shifts from working from in the school setting, sometimes to home setting. I know the whole national conversation, actually global conversation, as I'm doing work on a global level, working with students in Lithuania and presenting in the UK. But it shouldn't be on a wing and a prayer that our lessons are going to work because of the technology. But you know what? There's been situations I've gone in beautiful hospital, auditoriums, but sometimes the thickness of the walls, it made the internet, and fortunately I started my career out doing children's camp. So when our boys were growing up, if we had a long wait in the dentist's office, before long their shoes are off and we're using their socks as hand puppets. And I know that's the audience that I'm talking to. So talk about pivot. You guys could write the book on pivoting from teaching during COVID-19. But not only that, you have personal stressors. What about your own children and your family members at home? Maybe you have a family member that was furloughed from a job, or maybe you own a small restaurant downtown, or, a garment or shoes or something, a bike shop, and now because people can't come in and frequent your business, you're going on one income and you have these concerns. Or maybe you have elderly family members as I do, my mother who lives here, and I've limited people that I'm around because of needing to be around her. And so all of these things are on your mind, but also there's concerns about the students. I read an article sometime back about educators who said that what really touches their heart, and thankfully it is a smaller percentage, but of the students that have not been heard from in their district since last March, when COVID began to shift and cause things to change in educational settings. And so what do we want to do to begin to bring about some strengths and resilience during COVID-19? Well, we have to start with self-care. You need to make your own self-care a priority. You need to utilize social supports, having a virtual coffee break or a lunch hour with colleagues. One thing I realized I never, ever did in a Zoom call before COVID-19, I never waved goodbye. And now you're my community and people that I have meetings with and committees that I serve on. Things are all by Zoom. So we're all given a high five or a big wave when you sign off. And so we can create, I was in a workshop about telehealth during COVID-19, and the facilitator was talking about how important it is to make eye contact with the camera. And so things that we can do to bring some warmth to our virtual settings. But you know what? We also need to have a routine. So when my work environment changed up to working more from the home and on using technology, I'm a big bike rider, and when the weather's nice, I can be found out on the trail riding my bike, and that's my real form of self-care, and incorporating some sort of physical movement. And administrators that are joining our training today, you need to make it a priority to check in with your staff, both collectively and individually. And these can be in some small, simple ways, and make it a priority to encourage staff to take some time during the day to manage stress, take care of themselves and their families. So I love this little graphic. I wish we had time today and I could see all your lovely faces, but look real quick here on some things that are good suggestions for self-care. And if you have a way that you like to reboost, recharge your battery, and it's not on the list, maybe add that in the chat real quick and one of them can see. We won't talk about it now for time's sake, but I'm always loving to gather new ideas. Things like getting plenty of sleep. Did you know when you're sleeping, your immune system is building itself up? So we need to make sure that we're and getting sleep, and on a day that's warm enough to get outside. Cooking, I love to cook, but then I have to be careful because I love to eat my cooking. Some people love to journal. We did a self-care event back here a couple years ago with our professionals, came in the month of December, and I went to the Humane Society and I checked out 3 little kittens. And while we're talking about domestic violence programs and being a shelter worker and some of the social workers from our local homeless shelters, these jobs are hard. We were passing around 3 little gray kittens, and you can hardly defrag holding a little kitten in your lap. And then some people like to tidy up. If you're on this call today and you like to tidy, I'd like your name and number, because I could really help you de-stress by going into my basement and doing some work down there. But you know what? It's different strokes for different folks. But what is my message here? Find a way to take care of yourself. All right, now we want to talk about identifying and assessing stress in our students. So even though we talked at the beginning about not needing to know the stories, we know the stories are out there. So when you do have families and children that have already been identified with histories of trauma, we need to realize how fragile COVID-19 can make their circumstances and their situation, because sometimes they've been cut off from you at school, who are the healthy support relationships. So the stressors of this crisis can place all children at risk. Be aware of children that might be at greater risk. Find opportunities for short individual check-ins. And I see all these great YouTube videos of things that teachers are doing. And so many of you already are thinking of these marvelous strategies. And then note changes in behavior of a child acting more tired or listless or having difficulty concentrating. You know, if mom and dad are having problems in the home, maybe a spouse has lost a job, you know, arguing, worries about money could be escalating. And so, you know, you may see a child that's normally really chatty now all of a sudden become quiet. And these might be normal things to their circumstances, but it might also warrant a need for a referral to a counselor. And addressing and treating traumatic stress, I want you to see, educators, you're one of the very few adults outside of household that have been allowed to see children during COVID-19. And while you cannot be expected to be the mental health professionals, what we talked about a few slides back is just by the kindness of the bus driver, the kindness of the school custodians, all of those things can be the charging stations that kids need now more than ever. And school staff can use their relationships with kids to connect, to listen, help families link to additional services if you suspect that a child is experiencing depression, anxiety, or the things that trauma can bring on. And even remotely, educators can provide these supports to the children and to their families. And here's just a little graphic that I found. I believe it came from Star Commonwealth, which is an older program that provides great training for teachers and educators. If you're not familiar with their website, I think I have it on my last slide about resources, but here's a conversation card in talking to kids about COVID-19 and just some great little ideas. All right, you want to share centered strategies, healing-centered strategies with caregivers. Maybe when you have a caregiver coming to get a child and they mention a child's behavior and maybe they're anxious going home because they don't know when school has changed. You know, some of my school superintendent friends, you know, tell me this week we're going this way, but then when we see an uptick in COVID in our community, then the guidance from our health departments are we better go back to virtual. And so that creates a sense of anxiety and instability to kids. So maybe passing along to some of our caregivers in a virtual email about upstairs, downstairs. Now you can enlist the help of the families in strengthening some of these healing supports. And then find ways to greet children by name, or if it's virtual, to do high fives or something that can help the children have that sense of warmth. All right, now my favorite part, and we've got a little over an hour. We're going to talk about strategies. And I was telling Lindsay earlier this week, I've presented this exact training to one other school district here locally. I did training for all the counselors and the principals and school administrators back in November. And I'm super excited about this one because this is my first training where I include strategies and actual things and some photographs at schools I've been working with on moving this also in middle school and high school. So we're going to talk about creating trauma sensitive schools. What does a trauma sensitive middle and high school look like? What are learning environments that heal, and how we see that all staff, all school staff are key to success. All right, now in this training, we are going to see 3 videos. One of them is Matthew Portell and his great work at Fall Hamilton. But we're going to see a couple of videos that are about, this one's about 10 minutes. And I want you to really notice the process that this principal used to move their school from being aware of a trauma to moving to trauma sensitivity. So take some good notes and see how they take some steps to involve everybody in the school that wants to begin the journey to becoming trauma sensitive. Go, Molly.
My name is Natalie Pohl, and I am the principal of the George School in Brockton, and I've been in Brockton for 22 years. I think one of the biggest successes that we've seen so far is with the size of our building. We have over 1,000 people under our roof, 925 children, 100 plus staff on any given day. So to really have a school-wide initiative that everyone is focused on, from the teachers, the secretary, the MTAs, the paraprofessionals, the cafeteria workers, our lunch ladies, and everyone is talking the same language, I think is really important. And again, it was an opportunity for us to really come together as a school to create and articulate the kind of school that we wanted to create for students.
It was clear that the staff was ready to move forward towards becoming a trauma-sensitive school. And teachers are ready to change their mindset about the way students behave, why they behave in those ways, and what we can do to help them improve their behavior as opposed to strictly punishing students for their behavior.
I had asked the staff members if there was anyone that would like to join me in creating a safe and supportive school team to please let me know. And I was really surprised by the number of staff that emailed back and said they wanted to be part of it.
When I realized that the way that we have been working with children since I started school had to change. When I first started teaching, everyone had to sit in rows. There were no small groups. And if you had a quiet classroom, you had a good classroom. There was no such thing as productive noise. Everything was discipline, discipline, discipline.
One thing that we've learned is that if a child isn't ready to learn, it doesn't matter what lesson you have or what materials you have or how fantastically you present it. They're not ready, they're not ready. And so what we do is we work very hard to make sure our children come in every day and that they're greeted, they're welcomed, and they realize that school is a safe place for them.
So morning arrival was another one of those structural changes that we had made in our school about 3 years ago, and really wanted a safe way for our students to enter the building. But every morning a team goes outside and we're greeting the students and welcoming them to the school day. We started shaking hands or giving fist pumps and things like that. So the kids smile, they look forward to it. The parents are smiling, the kids are smiling, and it's just a nice way to start your day.
There's my Austin. Have a great day. Good morning.
All of our staff members are a really important part of the whole George School team. Our custodians are wonderful. Mr. Webster is out front every morning greeting students as they come in. Many parents have stopped and just have said, he is the best custodian ever, and they just really love his greeting and his smile every morning. Mr. Smith is another one of our custodians, and on any given day, you can find him sitting with a table of students in the lunchroom and talking to them and finding out about their weekends or their days or what they like to do. It's just really nice to see them developing relationships with our students, and that's really important. It's all about developing relationships.
Goes along with the word. What's there? That's great. Can you show us where
There were two main areas that teachers felt or staff felt that we needed to work on: communication and connectedness, building that sense of community. And at first we really focused on the adults in the building and how the adults interacted with one another, connected with one another, communicated with one another. So our first professional development that we had with teachers was a building-wide opportunity for all staff to attend. Our custodians, our cafeteria ladies, everyone participated. And I can't tell you how many people at the end of that training came up to me and said, we needed this, and these are our students, and what can I do? What's our next step? So I feel like they were facing these challenges in their classrooms, and they were looking for it to be addressed, and how we could work together to create some changes. So they were ready for it. So when we started talking about how we could connect our students to one another, lots of different ideas were brought to the table. But we wanted something that was easy to implement, wasn't a heavy lift for teachers. Teachers are very busy. They have a lot on their plates. We wanted to make it something that was natural. So we came up with the idea of Breakfast Buddies. The idea was to connect with a classroom that you don't normally get to talk to.
So we've been doing Breakfast Buddies in my classroom with a few different classes. We find that it's hard sometimes with all of the different programs that we have here at the George School for kids to not feel like they're kind of pigeonholed into which classroom they belong to.
And so after Breakfast Buddies is done and they come in, one of the things I'll do at morning meeting is say, oh, who made a new friend today? What are they going to do this weekend? So you kind of hold them accountable, but at the same time, you're giving them a chance to be social. And breakfast is a great time to do that.
Natalie really values everybody's input and feedback, and you really feel that you are affecting change in the school. This isn't just a one shot and done. This is something that's become part of the fabric of the school, part of the everyday working of the school, and it's something that's really important to me to continue.
Mrs. Pohl shares this with everybody, not just the teachers, custodial staff, cafeteria workers, paraprofessionals, teacher assistants, nursing staff. Everybody is involved. Anybody that works with children knows about our action plan and what we do here at the George School.
I'm Dr. Claudia Gallagher. I'm one of the adjustment counselors here at the George. One of the things we do is the Tranquility Room. We learn to really pay attention to what our five senses tell us. We teach the kids to be able to read themselves so that they know that they can choose to react to things in the way that is best for them. They don't have to feel that they are at the mercy of what happens outside of them.
It's been hard to describe what a trauma-sensitive school, what it is. And when people come to visit, I feel like they want to see one specific thing, but it's not one specific thing. It's many different parts all moving at the same time, and how everyone in the building comes together and how we work with each other and how we work with our children to create that welcoming, safe, and supportive environment.
I would say the culture of the school right now is, I guess, a culture of family. You know, I don't know any other way to describe it. I do refer to our students as friends because, I don't know, that's just kind of naturally what has happened. And so we all support each other. You know, the kids support each other, adults support each other, and we see kids supporting, you know, adults too.
In terms of teaching and learning, I think the tone that you're using, smiling, eye contact, your body language, allowing students to share, just giving them that minute to be heard.
Everyone's opinion is valued, and I think that's a huge benefit that we've had since we've gone to a safe and supportive school, is that it doesn't matter what your job is, your knowledge is valued, your knowledge of the children, your knowledge of the school, and you have something to bring to the table, so please bring it.
I think that's one of the biggest changes that I've seen in this building since we implemented our action plan. Just, you know, the staff that really has a raised awareness that these children are doing so much more, and that there's a recognition and, you know, a mind shift in that we're teaching not only academics, but we're teaching social and emotional learning as well.
I just love how this work tied so nicely to initiatives that are already happening within the building, what it's done for our climate and the culture within the school. It's, you know, who doesn't want to come to, you know, a happy place to work?
I guess the video froze up there, Molly. You want to go ahead and stop it. You know, this group at TCCY, they set the bar high. We have practiced 2 times, 2 separate days, to try to bring to you today a flawless presentation. But as you know, as many of you doing virtual education, sometimes you get out there and, like right now, for me, that video played real well in the sound, but the pictures got behind it. So just bear with us. We're going to get it all there to you. But if the screen freezes up again in the next couple of videos, you know, just listen to the audio. And I've seen some of the questions popping up, and we will give you a list of these videos at the end. Okay, now try to, there we go. All right, so in that video, you heard the principal talking about just putting the welcome mat out and asking any teacher, any staff worker that wanted to join the conversation. And so any principals that are on the training today or school administrators, you know, think about getting the buy-in from your teachers. You know, I've worked with enough teachers to know that some are like, please, nothing more that we need to do. But I can tell you, educators, of the many schools, really into the thousands now of educators, sometimes I'll have 500-700 educators at a time. And I was having those types of groups when we met in person. So it adds up pretty quickly. But as working with educators, I've never found an educator who told me, after learning about trauma-informed concepts and their school beginning to make that shift, that they wish that they'd go back to doing it before the way they used to do it before they knew. And so while there's a bit of an investment of time and beginning to build that paradigm shift, that is going to come about best through teamwork. And that's what this principal was doing. Now, let's take a look here at our slide in front of us. Okay, so we want to read down the slide, the column that says traditional view. And we're going to see how by today's training and implementing these concepts, you can move your school environment, your classroom, your district to becoming trauma informed. So in a traditional view, a child, the students and the school staff, the bus driver, this is how we look at the students, that a child can choose their behavior. And because of willful behavior, they need a consequence as a result of it. And then we begin to label children's behavior negatively, that child's manipulative, that child's trouble. And then what does that do? That sets up an authoritarian environment in our school. Now, we're all for keeping rules. We're all for holding children accountable. Please hear me on that. But, you know, when we provide comfort, you will get the control. I know of studies and works that I've been doing in correctional settings when actually prisons go more to helping the inmates understand that they realize that some of what happened in their life was not their fault, then it creates us more of an atmosphere of safety and comfort, and that brings about the controlled behavior that we were after anyway. So when we go in a traditional view, we think, well, they could do, you know, yesterday Johnny was well behaved last week, but today, you know, just a little stinker. And so we think that it's willful and it's an authoritarian environment, and it minimizes the importance of building coping strategies. And it creates an environment where children have to work for their support. You know, I'm going to tell you, my boys growing up, my boys are in their 30s now, married with families of their own, and they went to a private Christian school when they were in grade school. And every year, the most coveted award in that school was called the Eagle Award. And the Eagle Award just wasn't for good grades, but it was for leadership and good behavior. And one of my oldest son's friends, Richard, he won the Eagle Award 2 years in a row. And I remember how dejected my sons would be, you know, and not winning the Eagle Award. And so Mama Haas, I created the Beagle Award. And so we found out little fun ways to cheer them on, that, you know, they brought home grasshoppers in their lunchbox, or, you know, that they, you know, finished all their lunch, or they did whatever. Well, what was I doing? I was trying to help them to see that while we want to celebrate the Eagle Award going to Richard. Actually, one time I got called to the principal's office. My older son did get in a little trouble on the playground. And when I came into the principal's, I don't see how you do it as educators. But when I went into the principal's office, she's telling me what my son has done. And I look over at my son and I say, son, remember this year? And he was only in second grade. So I said, son, remember this year we talked about trying our best to win the Eagle Award, like Richard, your friend. And he put his little hands on his hips and he looked at me and he said, Mom, you have to face it. Richard, he's been raised right. And the principal, she couldn't even look at me for laughing, because, you know, David's like, you know, anyway, acted like his childhood is pretty rough. So we want to realize that this traditional view needs to take a shift when we put on our trauma-informed lens. So now, what does a trauma-informed view of our school looks like? We know that every child who comes into our setting wants to do well, but they lack the skills or have developed survival behavior. So instead of it being willful behavior, it's survival behavior. You know, when I worked in medical, in the healthcare field, what if we had doctors for years and years and years misdiagnosing a disease? You know, would we want to continue in that practice? But because oftentimes educators have not learned about trauma-informed care in their professional training, then we have mischaracterized a child's behavior as willful, when really instead it's survival. So in a trauma-informed view in a school, now we realize that a child's behavior, we can look at it constructively. We realize the behavior is the way they're talking to us, the way they're telling us life is outside of school is hard, that I'm having big emotions that I can't control. And so that's when we shift into high gear and bring about our calming strategies, which we're going to talk about in a minute. And then that changes our school environment to a collaborative approach, and where behavior is a communication, and now it serves a function, and all children receive support regardless of the need. And then it becomes a child-centered environment. All right, this next video is just excites me so much. What does this look like in a high school and middle school setting? And in this video, they actually video the students themselves who talk about how much it meant to them to begin to change this shift. Just simple things like asking questions in class, and what causes them as a student to feel safer and more willing to ask a question in class. Now, once again, we're doing our best to get the videos in sync with the language, but if it freezes up again, just listen to the audio and we'll send you a video link later. Okay, Molly, thanks for all your good work. Molly, you going to share this one? Please, ma'am.
So Salem Academy is a 6th through 12th grade charter school in Salem. We're in year 13. We started out with 88 students in 6th and 7th grade 13 years ago, and we are now at about 440 students, growing to 480. Our school is about 49% white and 51% students of color, about 40% free and reduced lunch. As the student body population grew, we had a limited capacity to really address, certain social emotional needs, behavioral needs.
It just became really clear that what we were missing was that emotional piece, and that was impacting social, and it was impacting behavior. It interfered with the students' ability to focus in class.
So I think staff were seeing challenging behaviors in their classrooms, and when they had their first presentation on the impact of trauma on learning, I think there was just a big aha moment for a lot of people, really recognizing what that looks like for students, how it can present as something different.
Once our staff had an understanding and a shared understanding of the impact of trauma on learning, our staff then said, okay, what can we do? We know there's a lot of things that are outside of our control, but what we did learn is that students do better if they're connected to a community, and they also do better when they have relationships with people in the building.
If I'm in a class and I know me and the teacher don't really connect, when they call me, I sort of get that feeling, if they're asking a question and they call on me oh Eddie, answer this question, I get that that nervous feeling. But if I'm with the teacher that's that I have a good connection with, I'll feel free to answer with no hesitation or anything.
Being able to talk to your teachers or having that trust factor with different teachers or different students is it's a good feeling, because when you don't have them on the outside, okay, I can come to school and I can get these resources, or I can get the help, or I can talk to this teacher or this person, and it makes you feel good and know that you have support.
So one of our core values of the school is structure and consistency. And so what you see in the morning when we're greeting students, welcoming them into the school, you also see when teachers are greeting students at the door to the classroom and welcoming them in. It's part of really a check to just, make sure that we're welcoming kids, but also for me or for the teacher to be able to notice kind of what's going on with kids.
I like how some of the teachers will stand outside their doors, or administration will stand outside their doors and they'll greet you as you walk through the hall, so it makes it feel like welcoming. And
I feel like being in a welcoming school, you kind of have the assumption that you're friends with everyone, so you're really comfortable with everyone, even if you don't talk to them a lot or you haven't talked to them at all or anything like that. You just kind of assume everyone's your friend and everyone's friendly, and it creates a really good kind of cohesive environment.
So our ultimate aim is to improve the sense of community in the school, which in turn would improve and develop positive school culture. We've learned quite a lot about building safe and supportive classrooms and how to extend that to safe and supportive communities.
Things that we're doing this year, I would not have thought counted, if you will, when we first heard this idea of trauma-sensitive practices and making this a safe school. So the idea of coming up with school spirit and a mascot, that wouldn't necessarily be the first thing that crossed our mind. But that's one of the things that's happening this year that I think is fitting and having an impact. I'm actually on a team this year that's working on voice, generating more opportunities for student voice.
We're basically just a community of people, and that's how we function. That's the dynamic around here. You know what I mean? There's no there's no discriminatory. It's just we all get along. Basically, it doesn't matter where you come from. It doesn't matter what race you are. None of that matters. Extracurricular activities, for example, that really helps you build a closer bond with the students in the school. I do cheerleading, so it's definitely fun seeing some of the girls outside of practice and we interact hey girl, what's up?
We wanted to reach all of our students and get all of our kids engaged in after school activities so that we have an opportunity to help them build relationships with adults, but also to build relationships with one another so that they feel connected with peers, and we know that that can improve self-esteem and help them overcome some barriers that they're experiencing.
The steering committee identified our 3 priority areas as family engagement, building communities, and then also increasing staff capacity to address behavior in a trauma-sensitive way.
So how do you engage parents at a high school level when you are expecting students to be a lot more independent and take the responsibility?
We would start to get in touch with parents and tell them all these wonderful things that their kids were doing on a regular basis. And then when we had to engage them in cooperating with us to deal with any type of behavioral issue, you know, we'd already be partners.
Parents are so excited
Mm-hmm.
that they are always informed as to what is coming up, when is their math test, when is that assignment due, what's going on in that curriculum spotlight that they heard about last week. So it's really nice because when parents are engaged, students are engaged.
So there was a time where my dad was going through a sickness in middle school, and I had so many absences, and I just didn't want to come to school. And having that welcoming environment really made me just overall do better in what I wanted to do in school.
I think the relationship with our teachers are super important, and I have a relationship with a lot of my teachers this year. And I think it's super important because it makes you want to go to that class. It makes you want to learn, and it kind of helps you take in what you're hearing from them a lot more because you respect that person a lot more.
It was hard at first to get a buy-in, but then once people started realizing what this means and that everyone does experience trauma, and you don't know what trauma students experience, and you don't know who had a traumatic experience.
One thing that I think really increased buy-in from the staff was when we talked about how, yes, you're doing this for maybe 2 very obvious students, but then there are maybe 10 students who are also experiencing trauma and you don't know about it.
The group that I was in was, we sort of loosely called it the restorative justice group. There's the sort of the traditional school model, you break a rule, you must be punished for the rule breaking. And restorative justice loosely looks at, it's not the rule that's broken, it's the relationship that's harmed. So how do we repair the relationship?
The work of the first year and kind of understanding the safe and supportive framework allowed for the engagement in restorative justice, allowed for the engagement in student voice, that kind of the whole mindset, or a lot of the mindset of faculty shifted to be more open to those types of ideas.
Some of our discipline code didn't support all students. And so, I'm thinking of an example that one of my students and I worked on together.
There's a lot of teachers in the school that I got into a bad altercation with, Miss O, for instance. Me and her never really saw eye to eye until now, until not recently, but we got to an understanding, and me and that's my homegirl now.
Our African American students were upset that they couldn't wear headscarves in school.
Whereas I wear my scarf to school, and then my type of hair it's not immune to this weather. I shouldn't be having my hair like this sometimes, and I have to cover it.
When the girls and I started having real conversations about what it means for them to get ready in the morning and what it means to be able to wear a scarf on some days that they want to, I worked with them. We created a little committee, we looked at it, we took it to other administration, and they said, of course, this is what we do. This is why we listen to students.
I never seen a school that actually took time into learning about their students. That was the first time I never, compared to my elementary schools, I never really had that same relationship with teachers.
I think working with students to hear their voice on something that's really important, such as this topic, and then seeing that change through with them has made a huge impact on our relationships with students, and they feel valued and they feel heard.
So at Salem Academy, we have this room called the Mindful Moments Room, where if you're just having an off day, or like me, I deal with anxiety, and if I feel that building up, I can just ask my teacher to excuse me, and I can go to that room, and there's games and coloring things, and it just helps you ease your mind and get back on track for the school day.
The body language of the teachers has changed over the last couple of years, and also the tone of voice used with students has changed. And that is so exciting to me as a counselor, because I know, from talking with kids over the years that those are the things they respond to. I see teachers leaning over and bending down to talk to students, to get on their level. And I think those little changes that teachers may or may not realize that they're doing have really helped our kids to feel supported, to feel connected, to feel at ease when they're in this building.
I think the really nice thing about this work is that our entire staff now has an understanding of the impact of trauma. I don't see this work ending because our teachers now, I feel like they're more invigorated than ever.
Everybody's happy for when somebody else gets a good grade or when somebody else gets into a great college. But it's really pushing yourself and being your best self in every subject.
And I feel like when you look forward to coming to school, that your energy rubs off on other people. And it just shows really like how we are really like one. Like we're a community. We're not just a school. We're a community of students who all like care about each other and care about our learning.
All right. Wow. Hearing the students talk about the changes and the teachers, the counselor there at the end was talking about seeing different tones of voice in the teachers and, just different attitudes. And a lot of this came about through just realizing how we can just create a more supportive environment. Okay. I have the animation on my slide set to when I...
So Salem Academy is
Click
a
it.
6th through 12th grade charter
Starts
school in
playing.
Salem.
There we go. Let's see if we can get out of it. Okay, there we go. Okay. All right. So now let's just talk about some real life stories, okay? This is a part that fires me up, is the fact that when you attending today and the great work that you're doing, and I've just seen a few of the little comments in the chats, and that's so awesome, the work that you're doing. But when you hand these tools to the teachers, and remember in the early part of our training, I said it's not one size fits all. And so working with a district up in Marion, Virginia, recently the superintendent and I, we co-authored an article and we put it in the Global Online Learning Collaborative about trauma called ACEs Connection. And he sent me these lovely photos. So he's the one that 2 years ago when I was working in healthcare, I met him and his administrative team and went in and in that summer did a half-a-day workshop with the principals and school administrators. The next, a few weeks later, went in and did it with the teachers, and they formulated this game plan of where to get started. And then this year, they brought me in to do virtual training for the bus drivers and cafeteria. And so this is what the school began to see would work in their setting. So here you have high school seniors that realize the reason that some of their classmates are coming to school with a bad smell or the same clothes is that no one at home is doing any laundry. And so the school on their own went out into the community, worked with some of the faith partners and raised up donations, a lot of blue jeans there, and they raised up a clothes closet. And so that when instead of kids being bullied that they don't have the most fashionable tennis shoes or the new pair of jeans, now the students and the school is providing the solution. And this didn't cost the school anything but a little bit of time to reach out to the community. And then the school superintendent, Dr. Carter, who's a dear friend now, he said that the school invested in a washer and dryer. And do you know who runs this free laundry service? It's the senior class. They're doing this free laundry service to help their classmates. And you can really see how in these settings where there's that understanding, kind of like our video Josh, where everybody said at first, it's kind of weird, this kid's holding the door open, but that one act of resilience began to change the culture. And then these great high schoolers, they came up with another program called Suds for Buds. And there's no shaming, no blaming, but just the kindness to have some deodorant, have some shampoo, some toothpaste that you can grab it if you need it. And again, these high school students reached out to the community and got donations. All right, here's another school. When I worked in healthcare, the administration and the department I was working with, they wanted to bring training into one of the local high schools that had received a grant and wanted to do a pilot program by training all the juniors and seniors in their health classes, in their health services classes. So I went over and one of my teammates, and we did a couple of days of training on the very same concepts you're hearing today to juniors and seniors in high school. Well, teachers, I want to tell you something. I was not cool when I was 16. I am definitely not cool at 62. And I felt like when I was doing those training for those couple of days, like you could hear a pin drop. In my mind, I was kind of battling the thoughts that this is the most unexciting, content these students have ever heard. But on the last day, I said, you know what, students, thank you for being here today. Thank you for listening. And before I go, I just want to ask a question. Do you feel what we've talked about the last 2 days means anything to Elizabethton High School? And every hand in the class shot up. And I had to go back to remembering days when my boys were teenagers. And sometimes, they're just quietly taking it in. And so these are some things that they came up with. And they did a beautiful program that was peer led by these health science students. So they did a mass project with some of their with their students, their peers. And they asked students on the front of a mask to write, how do you think people see you? But then on the inside of the mask, how do you see yourself? Another great thing that this group did, and I know there's some on the training today from this great school, so we're giving you a shout out, Elizabeth and I. So when I visited the first time when we set up the training, the students told me that they were so tickled that their high school had gotten funding to have a mental health counselor come 2 part-time days a week. But when they did the tour for me the first time I went there, they showed me that the counselor was going to be operating from a broom closet because the school really just didn't have an empty office. And one of the students pulled me aside and said, do you think on the worst day of your life you'd want to talk to a counselor in a mop room? So these students on their own put together a budget of paint samples and photos and lamps and a little sofa and presented it to the grant administrator. And they went in on their own Thanksgiving break and turned this beautiful little mop room into a beautiful counseling center for their counselor. Then at the alternative school that I've worked with now for several years, and again, this fires me up when we see a team approach. So some of this came from the school secretary. They decided to have an incentive bulletin board as soon as you come into school, and we would have a student of the month, and they told all the students what some of the criteria was, and they would put photographs of the students up there that they were celebrating each month. This next picture there where it says Yahoo, I guess that's what we do in Tennessee. The guidance counselor told me that at this school, the mascot is a topper hat. It's called Topper Academy. So she announced to the students, 120, 130 students, she announced one day, if you earn a credit in your recovery credit program, if you earn a credit, come see me and I'm going to put your name, the date, and the credit you earned on a topper hat, and we are going to celebrate it and put it on a billboard, a bulletin board. Now, I want you to look at the Yahoo board, because the day they told me about this, it was her idea that she would hope to just fill that one bulletin board. But because typically that school of 130, 40 students in a year would recover 200 credits. But to her amazement, I literally cried when I saw the room, what happened. To her amazement, that year, those students regained 1,155 credits. The next year, the students, using a trauma-sensitive school approach, earned 1,044 credits. But in her idea to fill that bulletin board, they had topper hats all the way around the room. And then the principal met with the students and said, how about if I write a little grant? And when you meet your credit goals, we could have a block called incentive. So she worked with the local school superintendent and the principal at the main campus that was her supervisor. And she said, could you allow us to have one 45-minute block a week called incentive? And working through those changes, they got approval. And so they went to do some things. They bought some drones. They bought a lot of the young men wanted a weight room. They came up with the SRO that was at that school for a while. I was at the police department then, and she started giving guitar lessons. They had a music room. They had a community garden. I also used to work with the downtown merchants in my city, and the students that worked in the garden, then they started in their commercial kitchen turning the peppers and the tomatoes and the onions into salsa. And now they're learning marketing and they're selling it downtown at the farmers market. And so this is a school that actually the juvenile system told me these students don't want to go home for summer because they created this environment of positivity and support and hope. All right, so what are some healing-centered environments? So let's talk about every age from kindergarten to high school. Here's some key things that we need to bring into our classrooms, into our schools that help the trauma survivors in our staff and in our students and our families to thrive. We need to have our schools with a safe, and I know school safety is very important, but it goes beyond maybe having some schools have a metal detector. And I'm not really focused on that type of safety, but just where, like the one student said in the video, if I'm connected to a teacher, I feel like I can talk out in class and answer questions and all. So it's safe, it's hospitable and welcoming, and find ways to build community, provide connection to every child, teach and model regulation. All right, so here's some of the things that schools locally are doing after training to begin to implement this. And I know there's been a lot of YouTube videos, and many of you maybe already have a method of greeting, but they hang up a little poster. You know, I'm kind of a hugger, but not every child, particularly if they've been traumatized, do they want you to grab them for a, some sort of physical embrace. And I know in a school setting, that's not always as appropriate. So give children an option of how they want to be greeted. Even if you're doing it virtually, you could maybe have a first slide of, here's our virtual fist bump or high five. And then some of the schools here, Dr. Richard Church, who serves on Jill's council up here in Northeast Tennessee, he's doing a fabulous job at Cloudland High School, and they created a kind wall, and he got the message to the students that in a trauma sensitive classroom, how the schools are going to become kind is because I'm going to be supportive. I'm going to make a difference. And I noticed doing a bike ride a while back that Happy Valley Elementary School had a big kind sign hanging out in the foyer as you come in. So what are some vulnerable times for feeling unsafe in school? Okay, think about many of these are transitioning times. So a child that's dealing with anxiety, an unstable environment at home, maybe riding the bus, there's a little bit of anxiety, either going to school, leaving home, or coming away from school, going back home, or maybe the unsafe time could be the beginning of the day, or recess, or lunch, or changing classrooms, walking in the hall, a point system, or the end of the day. So some of the concepts that we're talking about, think about how could you have real seamless transitions during some of these different times that statistically can be vulnerably, students can feel vulnerable. And this is a great example that I saw when I was working in healthcare. When everybody started masking up, the Vanderbilt Children's Hospital came out with this button project, and I shared it with the Child Life Services in the hospital where my office was, because children are just seeing you masked up. I don't know if any of you do this, but I'm out somewhere and somebody's standing behind me in line at the supermarket. I'll turn around, and I've learned to sort of tell how people are smiling with their eyes, but sometimes I'll point at my mask and say, I'm smiling, but think about this $2 button that we could bring into our schools, where a recent snapshot of you and your beautiful smiling face is on the outside of your clothing, so that children are seeing the warmth of that even while we're masked up. And here's a great assignment. Last Saturday, I was training about 400 regional statewide childcare, early childhood providers across the state. And we talked about the connection assignment. So administrators or teachers that supervise, maybe the next time you have some kind of staff meeting, even if it's virtually, ask all the staff to bring a picture or a drawing or a Post-it note with the name of every child that's under their care, and hang these around the wall, post them on the screen, and ask all the staff that interact with those same children to go around the room and just put a sticker or a check mark beside every child they feel they have some small connection to. And I don't want to get into it too deeply, but in the 2 videos that we've already seen, the teachers talked about how they connected to students. One teacher was having breakfast with a few students, or the tall gentleman there was the fist bumping and all. So have your staff look at all those names and mark, who do they feel connected to? And I can about promise you, at the end of this little activity, you are going to see a few names that are left out that maybe no teacher, and it's really no one's fault, but we have a few students that are slipping through the cracks, and maybe no one is intentionally feeling connected. So now we need to assign those students to some teachers that are going to be more intentional in their greeting or their wave or something like that. All right, we're going to see this little video, and the reason I like to show it from Paul Hamilton, Matthew Portell, great friend and a great educator in Tennessee, is it shows a similar but a little bit different approach to bringing this whole process into your school and involving all staff.
We understand the effects of adverse childhood experiences nationally. This is not an issue that is just isolated to my demographic at my school.
You're gonna do great, aren't you? Okay, nice work.
We understand what it does to them now and potentially in the future. We're right off of downtown Nashville, and we're in the midst of some serious transformation and gentrification. And so a lot of our students are being displaced. We have students who are currently experiencing some serious tragedy in their lives, and we know their stories, and we take a proactive approach here to make sure their needs are being met.
Doing all right today?
The old approach was, you're at school, you need to be at school and play school, and it was compliance driven. But the trauma approach is taking a completely different lens. They have to feel safe, they have to feel nurtured, and they have to feel supported. When kids walk through the door, they don't leave everything that has happened at the door. They're still developing emotionally, they're still developing cognitively, and we want to give them the ability to do that in a safe environment that is school. To be quite frank, this transformation is more about adults than it is kids.
You had a perfect day.
It's about giving the teachers the understanding and support to be able to meet the needs of the kids on a basic level.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 9.
There was a big mind shift, for me especially. My students might have had a bad day, something happened at home, no one was home last night. You can't just be like, come in and do math now. So when they know they can trust you and they talk to you, their academics start to blossom.
One of the most transformative strategies is getting someone who is trained in understanding students' mental health needs.
I was brought in as a part of the district initiative to increase the awareness and knowledge of ACEs, which are adverse childhood experiences. Class been okay? Yep. So coming in and identifying different trauma-informed practices that we can implement here in the school.
One of the foundational programs that we're utilizing is the Leader in Me. A lot of people are very familiar with the 7 habits of highly effective people for kids. And so here we foundationally teach our kids the 7 habits.
You'll see the posters around the school and you'll see the kids, they know all of the 7 habits and they will spout them out to you.
The 7 Habits has helped me because I had to put first things first. I had to make sure that I was getting good grades and not starting drama with any kids.
We also build the students' capacity to develop their leadership skills by giving them a class in leadership. It's part of our specials rotation. Kindergarten through 4th grade are part of the Leader in Me curriculum.
Be proactive, be proactive.
We share this common language. It is so amazing with putting everybody on the same page. Building that positive school culture and an environment where everyone feels empowered to be successful.
We now have students leading other students in different activities throughout the building.
Who wants to go first?
And we value that.
Good morning, leaders. The time is 8 o'clock.
Traditionally, in most schools, you've got the iridescent lighting that burns our eyeballs like laser beams. But here we have teachers use a lot of low lighting. Some of our rooms have calming colors, utilizing color as a strategy. We also use essential oil diffusers with just understanding that your body is sensory. We utilize mindfulness as a strategy and understanding that smells and things around you are helpful. One of the approaches that we're using are peace corners.
A peace corner is like a place where you can just chill out. If I get like really frustrated and feel like I'm gonna yell, or when I feel really sad about to cry, I go to the peace corner.
It's a proactive approach. And so many times we give kids strategies, but we don't give them a time or a place to practice those strategies. We've really put a lot of effort in building positive relationships. Under that, there are strategies, and one of them is our check-in and check-out system.
Hey, Mariah.
Hi.
You ready to have another great day today?
Yep.
My check-in, check-out buddy, her name is Mariah, and she's in 4th grade. She comes to see me at the beginning and the end of every day. What are your goals for today?
Listen, be on task. Nice.
Awesome. She has 3 goals every day that she works on. She can get 0, 1, or 2 points for each of her goals.
And then at the end of the day, they know where they are. How was your day?
Good. Actually, it was fantastic.
Fantastic. People will see a point sheet, but the most motivating piece of our check-in and check-out system is the mentor-mentee relationship.
You go to him, and then he asks about your day, and if you had a problem somewhere, we'll talk about that and see how you can fix it.
The child knows every day they come in this building that somebody's excited to see them in the morning and excited to see them right before they leave. So do you think you knocked it out of the park? Mm-hmm. That's what I'm talking about. And it's that positive in, positive out mindset.
You did it with me.
That's right. No, but you did it on your own. That's you, my man. Nice work. That's been a huge success. Last year was a tough year. It was really tough. We didn't have the support systems fully in place that we have now. I didn't support teachers in the way that I should have and could have because I was a new principal and I just didn't know how. But that all changed at the end of the year when we all just as a team sat down and said, we've got to do something different. Our paradigm has to shift where we're talking about not only how to support students, but how to support yourself, self-care.
We know you can't help others until you help yourself. Sometimes this job is hard. This job is exhausting. Sometimes you just need a minute. Tap in, tap out is something that we've developed. You can text someone and be like, hey, can you cover my class? Can you give me a second? And we will gladly cover one another. You'd sometimes just need to ask for help. And it's okay. And it's really accepted here and it's promoted.
This is great.
Operating a trauma-informed approach is a blanketed approach for all kids.
You all have done outstanding work.
We have to be able to help them manage their experiences in productive ways.
What's your favorite on there?
It's not compliance-driven, it's a we've got your back approach.
Man, that is powerful. Did you see at the end where it in the statistics there that in 2 years, they started this in 2015. In 2017, 98% of the students felt they were connected to someone at the school. And you know, a lot of these things that I've shared are very low cost, if any cost. And so, you know, it's just one of the videos said it's really more of a change in mind setting of the adults. All right, we're going to wrap this up with lightning speed. We're going to talk about these classroom strategies, emotional regulation, how to bring that into the classroom, serve and return, healing gestures, and behavior. All right. So the first thing we want to do, which has been underscored by some of the videos, is we need to realize how having a predictable structure, a predictable schedule is very healing to kids that have a lot of instability and dysfunction outside of school. So have routines, maintain clear communication, follow a daily schedule, provide information in digestible amounts, which I need to take my own advice there. Sometimes I'm just like the fire hose, you know, but when we give kids, particularly with our online learning, make it digestible, and then show appreciation for children's efforts to complete the tasks and have regular attendance, because we know in a trauma-sensitive school environment, not all the children have the same support at home. Practice new social distancing and hand washing as new routines. Approach children's experiences with curiosity. And then when you can't do some of the things like maybe class picnics or graduations have to be virtual, invite the kids to help you to find new ways to create these rituals. And then support transitioning. A lot of the schools that I've been training, they now use, I would caution you to not use turning the light off as transitioning, because to many children that have been traumatized, bad things happen in the dark. I know from working at a police department almost 7 years that crime is more significant at night. And so when I was training healthcare workers, I told nurses, you know, when you leave the room, maybe just to say a word to a patient, are you ready now? I'm going to turn off the light. So find a support, you know, a signaling transition that maybe is not involved with turning off the light. Some of the schools now are using chimes or a song, something like that. And then the 4-to-1 ratio. And what we want to do here is not focus on, oh, did I have 4 positive reactions or interactions with a student today? It's not about counting, but it's about improving the relationship. So just kind of have a mindset every day that how can I improve my positive reactions to those students and even my teammates that I'm around? These can be achieved by friendly conversation, nonverbal acknowledgement. You know, sometimes national calls that I'm on, national meetings, you know, I'll be on with 100 people, I'm sure like you do in your work, but somebody that I really know well is on there, and I'll see a little wink or peace sign down in their screen. And, you know, that means a lot when we can't be in person. And then praise and criticism. And also things like, again, it's not about counting the 4-to-1, but it's about improving connectiveness. And so this improving connectiveness is going to bring about an overall feel of positivity. Can't you feel the energy in these videos from the students and the teachers? And it increases motivation and it improves and promotes academic achievement and regulated behavior. All right, now let's talk about emotional regulation. Back in our training where we talked about brain development, the upstairs part of the brain must have had serve and return with a caregiver for a child to develop the part of their brain where emotional regulation happens. So when you have children in your classroom that are just having regular outbursts for no reason at all, instead of taking those in any way personal, you need to understand that this child has not had emotional regulation modeled, okay? So from child development experts in courses that I've taken, the way a child develops emotional regulation is on a process. So here on the arrows, we'll see what's that process. So a child in their earliest years of life, when my sons were young or my grandchildren, all they knew how to do was cry. And so in my mind, I had the little flip chart when they're crying. Is it a dirty diaper? Do they need to burp? Do they need a meal, a bottle, or whatever? And I would just go through the little list until, you know what, they stopped crying and I hit upon it. Did they want to be rocked? Or Did they, were they sleepy? So when a child is first learning emotional regulation, it is the sole responsibility of the adults in their life that meet that need to regulate them. When they fall down, it's the adult that grabs them up and hugs and kisses their boo-boos. And when I talk to crime investigators for child crimes, they would tell me that in one particular year that I talked to a crime investigator, and she told me that 20 child homicides that she had investigated that year, 18 of those 20 were all where a child was left alone while caregivers were away at work or partying, and children would find food and choke on it because they're not getting this external regulation. Now we begin to graduate in our emotional regulation process to co-regulation. And when my boys were little, they start to be where they can, babble and say they want their blankie or maybe a cup or a drink or something like that. What are we doing now? We're starting to share the responsibility to help the child regulate. And our overall goal is to come where a child can self-regulate. You know what, now when my grandchildren are here in the house, if we watch a movie and they get cold, they know where Nammy keeps the blankets, and they'll run over to the cabinet, open the door and grab a quilt and bring it out. We may end up making tents before the day's over, but what are they doing? They don't need to ask for my help. If they're cold, they know how to handle that. And so when students are coming on your campus, when you understand this, you're going to be able to identify where they are in this process. And we need to incorporate some things and strategies, coping strategies, into our teaching environments that are going to help children move along this process. So what could we do? Here's some tools for teaching regulation. Magic mustache. So if you take your finger, your index finger, and bend it and place this bended part on under your nose in the little dip on your lip, that is actually a pressure point. And if you'll put this there, it kind of looks a little bit like a mustache. And while you're holding your knuckle against that little pressure point, begin to take a deep breath in, hold it, then breathe out. And when a child does 4 or 5 repetitions of magic mustache, it begins to bring about regulation. Now, I'm going to tell you a secret. I do a lot of training of police officers, and I talk about the benefits of regulating people on scene, but I don't call it magic mustache. I call it tactical breathing, because police officers, if you say tactical, they could do tactical pumpkin pie baking. But what is it, professionals? It's the very same concept. Or we could do some small activities like wall push-ups. When those kids are just bottled up energy, get them all lined up and stand up and say, let's do 50 wall push-ups or fingertip push-ups, by just having a grounded moment, by thinking about your fingertips and pushing them in and pushing them out like a push-up. And then engine plate, which is what's there on your slide. Just go to Walmart, you can get 300 of those paper plates that are real cheap, and punch a hole in it, have a little thing. And when students come in, let them show you where are they at on their plate. And I visited a juvenile justice setting in Maryland, and one of the guards showed me how she was using this with the girls when they would wake up in the morning. And it was so enlightening to the guards to know what was the attitude of the students. You can also use a version called zone chart, deep breathing, singing bowl, and chimes. And then star breathing. So many schools that I train now are printing this out and putting in the classroom. Breathe in, hold it, breathe out. And just a trip around the star helps a child move from the downstairs into the upstairs where they're regulated. Here's some resources that I always like to recommend. Here's a great book that's appropriate for kids that are really preschool age to about 4th grade. It's called Once I Was Very, Very Scared. And it's a woodland scene where animals are talking about things that make them frightened. And then you can see a PDF of the book online. The paper book is about $14, the hardback about $20. Some schools that I'm working with now, they create a shared library of trauma-informed resources that their teachers can use. I just trained a large foster care program called Isaiah 117 House back in November, and they were buying these books to go in every home where the foster kids are coming in waiting to transition to the home because that is such a traumatic environment. And you can go to the author's website, you can download free coloring sheets. Did I say the word free? It's a favorite of teachers, and you can help the students as you read the story find an animal they identify with. Do I run away when I'm scared? Do I zone out? Do I bite? Do I cry? And they say, which animal am I like? But as the story progresses, it shows what are some ways to regulate. Find a friend, talk to someone, play some sports. So by 2 free coloring sheets that a child is able to color, reading through that story, what are you doing? You're teaching emotional regulation. Here's a great bit of information to think about. Here's another process. So when we see a child's behavior is regulated, which is a state we want to keep, that's the promised land. That's where we want our students, is in a regulated state. It's going to look like they're restful, they're calm, they're engaged in their environment. So what are you to do, teacher, as you're seeing children and working with them while they're regulated? Here, your commitment there now needs to be to minimize triggers. That's when turning off a light, having a loud noise, that might be a trigger to some of your students. So you want to avoid triggers to keep students in that restful state. Okay, what about when they're revving? What about you start to see a knee tapping or fingers tapping or their little voice begin to get a high pitch? This is a child now is vigilant. They're being triggered by something in their environment. Maybe it's time for recess or time to go on the bus. And last week they were bullied on the bus. So what should be your priority? This is where we bring out our strategies. Maybe we do another set of wall push-ups or fingertip push-ups before we send the kids to catch the bus. What about when a child moves to re-experiencing? And I'm sure as educators, you've realized sometimes while you're teaching, though your child and student is physically in your room, something happens and all of a sudden in their mind, now they're disassociated and they're somewhere else. And this is when a child is going to go to fight, flight, or freeze because they're overwhelmed with big emotions. So your priority needs to be sure that you focus your efforts on not re-traumatizing the child through the efforts that you put out to keep the child safe. And then when the child is rebooting or reconstituting, calming down, beginning to manage their emotions, this is when you want to help your child continue to manage emotions and re-engage. All right, what are some physical needs? Sometimes a child's behavior is just generated by things like dehydration. Did you know by the time you actually feel thirsty, you are 10% dehydrated and you have lost the ability to concentrate? So we need to have water stations and encourage hydration. I've seen some beautiful photos of schools that have an area marked or a child brings in a refillable water station. When I worked in healthcare, one of the child programs they did was to help schools to have the finances to create these hydration stations. And then blood sugar, realize that we need to have a snack every, couple hours, because that decrease in blood sugar is going to bring about hyperactivity in the students. And then physical activity, whatever we do, don't use taking away playtime for students, because that is a great physical activity that's going to help them to regulate. You can download on your phone a free app called Go Noodle. Go Noodle's been emailing me all morning, and you can get some free mindful moments and mindful types of activities that are created by child development experts that you can use in a classroom setting. And I can promise you, they're going to send you more than you could ever use in your career as a teacher. And then sensory processing. Sometimes children, it's trauma in their life, but then they get characterized as a child with learning challenges. But maybe it's just that it's comforting to them to spin or jump or sway. And maybe there's the child that needs that occasional bear hug. When I was training teachers in Johnson County in 2019, one of the teachers at kindergarten told me every day when she left for lunch and left her assistant there, one student would always come up and say, "Where are you going? When will you be back?" And to her, that child was indicating that they'd had important caregivers in their life that sometimes left their life, and that was creating that concern. And we need to think about loud environments, maybe having some fidgets. Some of the calming rooms have fidgets, but think about behavior might be a sensory need. One of the things the alternative school up here does, they prepare for heat. Heat basically stands for hungry, emotional, angry, and tired. And we've talked about ways there, and the slide indicates how to address each one. And then here's a couple of photos as we starting to wrap this up. So this is the Boys and Girls Club where I'm on the board in 2017. We wrote a grant with the Tennessee Building Strong Brains, and we were awarded it. And we were able to create a calming room in that Boys and Girls Club. And now I know as a board member that Boys and Girls Club directors from across the state have come to visit this Boys and Girls Club, because now all the staff is trained in trauma-informed care. They actually have a staff trainer that continues to train all the volunteers, all the new staff, and Boys and Girls Clubs across the state are beginning to implement these calming areas. And here's what my buddy up in Marion, they started doing these sensory classroom, sensory hallways, walking down the hall, following duck feed or some other school mascot photos. They created a little room that they have for calming. And then wonderful Dr. Mabe, who's over in Bristol, bless her heart, she learned about trauma-informed care. I can't take any credit for work that she's done, but she had a tough elementary school, and she began to learn about this. And in 6 years, they went from one of the bottom 2 performing schools in the state of Virginia to, in 2019, they were selected as one of the top 2 performing schools in the state of Virginia. And they did that through taking the school into a trauma-sensitive process. So this is her office. She brought in a beach towel, a chair, and a bunch of sand, and an old pickle jar she got from the cafeteria. And she tells the students that when I need to settle down, my favorite place is at the beach. So when the students come to her office, what does she do? She says, have a seat at the beach and I'll be with you in a moment. And then she has all the classrooms have these little quiet corners. This is so exciting. I went over one day, it was raining. We went outside in the rain. I wanted to get photos of this. She has a peace path, and it just takes children through conflict resolution in a playground setting like hopscotch. You know, last year my husband and I celebrated our 36th anniversary, and I told him, I said, we are getting a peace path because we're going to 50 years or 60 years, because you think about how much conflict could be resolved if people just took some of these simple steps that are being successfully used in an elementary school. And so they get the students to work these things out. Then we want to think about serve and return. So we need to be able to have to recover the serve and return that some students are not getting at home. Then we can begin to implement this in our classroom. Another wonderful app is called Baby Sparks, and it's going to send you serve and return activities. I'm so proud of the champions in our region by dumping, and I literally mean thousands of professionals that have been trained. We now have wonderful libraries in Carter County that are taking their preschool reading time and they're doing serve and return. And these wonderful library workers have out of their own pocket created take-home bags to help the caregivers see how they could do some simple serve and return activities that are recovering these essential brain development functions all through a library. And these things can be brought in the classroom. Healing gestures, things like celebrate. You know, you may have a student and nobody at home is asking about their classwork, is asking if they had a good day. And that's why Fall Hamilton implemented the check-ins. So professionals find a way to celebrate your students. And remember the value of comfort, calm and comfort. Listening, just a few minutes of listening. I love this little quote, and I think about it often with my grandchildren. If you don't listen eagerly to the little stuff when they're little, they aren't going to tell you the stuff when they're big, because to them, it was all big stuff. We also want to collaborate, learn to work together with children. It gives them a sense of belonging and inspire. Teachers, you may not feel like you go home at night and have that Superman cape on, but you do. And children are inspired all the time by teachers who are helping them see that they can do it. All right, school discipline, and we're about to the end here. We want to use discipline to teach and not to punish. In some of the videos where they're changing the culture, you heard teachers say that everything happens through connection and relationship. So we don't want our discipline to make students feel isolated or cut off. You can make statements like, "You've been doing so good in your work, but I realized last Thursday that you just kind of were having an off day. Are you doing okay?" And you know, sometimes that might be something a child might be navigating, and it just shows up in their behavior in school. And evidence shows that discipline that removes children from instruction, such as suspensions and expulsions, does not help improve the student behavior or the school climate. So no child ever became good by being told they were bad. The fastest way to a child's heart is to listen. But teachers, I want you to know that sometimes the way they're going to talk to you is through their behavior. So there's a great book called Fostering Resilient Learners. One of the schools that I worked with, they bought it for all the teachers, and we had a book study. And I would go a couple of times a month, and we would talk about the chapters that they read. And they give a beautiful analogy of the Wizard of Oz story and not being sucked in by the tornado. And that tornadoes are simply behavior that a child is showing to show that that's the intensity of what's going on the inside of them. And so I like this slide, that when I am having a tantrum, that this is what other people think I'm saying. "You're mean, you're demanding, you're impossible, don't be a brat, you're exhausting, you're bad, and I can't handle you." But what am I saying as a child when I have a tantrum? I'm overwhelmed, I'm tired, I'm lonely, I'm angry, I'm hungry. I'm figuring new things out and my feelings are too big. I can't understand when I feel this way. I need you to teach me how to help my big feelings, and I feel safe with you. So realize, teachers, tornadoes are distractions. And look at the middle sentence there. Your ability to stay in the upstairs brain, typo there, ensures a stable environment for you, other children watching, and the instigating child. So that's why we recommend the Peace Corners. So as we wrap it up, there's going to be some barriers. This is not a destination, it's a journey. But some of the schools that I've shown you photos of, they've done this work in 1 year, 2 years, and have they arrived? No, but they're well on their way. And so there's an investment of time, and we thank you today for attending this training. But as you begin to do these things, we begin to see better outcomes. So where do we go from here? The leadership makes a commitment to change. I would encourage you to form a work group in your school and realize, like my mother used to tell me growing up, when you have a big job, like eating an elephant, you take one bite at a time. And our goal is to move from awareness to changing the culture. And then we want to have regular staff development on these practices. And then we want to think about hiring future staff. The work that I'm doing with East Tennessee State, Ballot Health Strong Brain Institute, I saw a piece that it showed in HR projections over the next 8 years, they project that the trauma-informed practitioner field is going to grow by 8%. I mean, in 8 years, it's going to grow by 22%. So think about putting in your job ads for new staff, that we want to have people that are coming to us that maybe have some trauma-informed training. All right, these are some links to the resources. This is me. And I want to say thank you, Lindsay. Thank you, Christy. Thank you, Jill, Rachel, Molly, you wonderful rock stars. And from the bottom of my heart, I just want to thank every educator that joined this today and for the wonderful things you're doing to make a difference in our communities. And that's a wrap.
Thank you, Becky. Do you have time for questions?
Well, sure. I can stay around a few minutes if people want to.
I think first Lindsay is going to give an announcement, and then hopefully we'll be able to get a couple questions answered.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We have 2 more events coming up here in the East Tennessee region. The first one is the Upper Cumberland Council on Children and Youth will be presenting their legislative event on Friday, February 12th, 2021 from 9 a.m. until 11 a.m. And we will make sure that we hope that you can join Christy Paling, We'll send out contact information for her if you would like to attend that council's legislative event. In the meantime, our next event in which all three councils will be presenting together is with Matthew Portell, who we saw in the video today. It will be called Opportunity in the Midst of a Pandemic. And this is the description. We're in the midst of an opportunity. Yes, you heard that right. The law of change tells us that we have opportunity to shift much needed paradigms in all sectors. However, this session will focus on the much needed paradigm shifts in education to become more trauma informed and the potential steps to move forward. So we look forward to that. It will be sent to our council members first, and we'll send it to our non-members as well, and those who are non-members that participated today, so that you can register for that event, because we'd love to have you join us. And I was going to say, please allow us 2 weeks to get you your CEU certificates and certificates, contact hours as well. We appreciate that. We appreciate you being patient and mindful with us. We have to decipher who logged on today, go through the list, make sure everybody attended, but we'll be sending out CEUs and certificates of attendance with contact hours. I will do everything I can to get the link to the video available. And if I can get the PowerPoint from Becky, I will send that to everyone in PDF if she allows us to share, and I'm sure that she will. And I will have links to all the videos, and we'll have a link to the training today as well. So thank you for attending. I'm going to turn things back over to Molly and Rachel and let Miss Becky field some questions for you. And thank you for attending again today.
All right, so it looks like we have got several questions coming in, and I'm going to give Rachel a moment to get those in order. She's been compiling them.
I'm so sorry. I was just muted. I was talking to myself.
Okay.
Seriously asking the questions when I was muted. So Becky, the first question that we have is really just about how can we get this training in front of all educators? Do you have any thoughts on that? Is it something that we should push for to be a requirement, or what do you think?
Okay, good question. You know, some of the districts that I've worked with over the last few years, certainly getting the buy-in at the superintendent level, if you want to begin to do a district change, or a principal, if it's, you know, you're gonna work with a school. But they're, you know, the trainings that I'm doing for them, they're part of the mandatory, you know, in-services. So you have education days for teacher, usually whatever's election day in November, you know, those kind of things, and just bring these trainings in. And then after you being in the training today, realize as you go into it, like one of the districts that I just trained back in November, the school, the administrator that's overall school safety and IT, she and I had kind of talked about it before the training. And then when she had her principals on, or her nurses, some of the guidance counselors, she knew at the end, I stopped and she gave a call to action. And what she did was just like the videos you saw here today. She talked about how they were going to form these committees. And in her school district, she wanted the guidance counselors to lead the conversation in the schools. And then it was just open to any teacher or any person that wanted to join. And then that's how they were going to begin. So, you know, you kind of start where you are. And if anyone, you know, my contact information is there at the end. If a district would like to contact me, you can visit my website and contact me through there. But I think Tennessee's doing a beautiful job in promoting these concepts from the Tennessee Department of Education. But, you know, you just want to attend trainings like this and encourage, you know, begin to change in your schools.
Okay, look at that. I made sure to unmute myself. So the second question, kind of a little bit followed off of that. How can we convince our faculty and staff that trauma and ACEs are a problem not only for students of color?
Oh my, well, just share some of the national statistics, 1 of 4 girls, 1 of 6 boys, and that knows no race or no color, that students that are growing up, when I worked for the police, every 12 hours I would get a shift report, it was called, and it would show all the officers' activities for those 12 hours. And, I've lived in this community since 1972 when I was in high school. And, from our nicest neighborhoods to our toughest neighborhoods, domestic violence is not, there's no socioeconomic boundaries. We could have a home in the nicest neighborhood, and actually in our community we had some pretty high profile domestic violence incidents that ended when someone came into a medical office where a spouse was working and gunned them down. And so, without unashamedly, we need to help our teachers understand that this is by no means limited to certain neighborhoods, that children, even having parents go through a divorce, or maybe a father or a mother that's taken a traveling job, all those kinds of things. So it's not limited to certain demographics or ethnicities at all.
Okay, the next question is, can you talk about, the way that sometimes in schools things are traditionally done, and how, schools may be potentially re-traumatizing their students?
Oh, that's a good question. Yes. So some of the slides that, pointed out, talked about, we want to think about the traditional view compared to the trauma-informed view. And so instead of restraining students or the isolation methods, at the alternative school that I've worked with, they actually renamed in-school suspension and they called it choices. So see, just by changing the name, in-school suspension, I mean, that's like school prison in my mind, and so now when the student has an infraction of, something that warrants them needing to go to the counselor and be set apart for a little bit. Again, I want to underscore that trauma-informed does not mean we don't hold students accountable, but instead of going into in-school suspension, they come to choices. And so when I've been over there before, I'll sit in on choices, or some of the students will come up to the principal in the hall and say, Miss So-and-so, I need to go to choices, because they realized that they were in the downstairs part of their brain and they did not make the best choice for how to react. And now they want to realize that in the upstairs brain, they're going to make a better choice. And so just simple things like that can help not to re-traumatize kids in settings. In one of my trainings I do, particularly for early education, I compare the benefits between time out and time in. See, time out again is, and I'm not throwing anybody under the bus if you're using time out, but what is time out doing? It is a bit of a shaming, setting kids apart, where if we have a calming corner, the whole class understands what the value of that is. So there's no stigma for a child to ask to go to a calming corner. And so there are a lot of different ways that we can, begin to implement things to not re-traumatize kids at school.
The next question is, what thoughts do you have on how parents and other volunteers can engage in this process of making more trauma-sensitive schools, especially during a time when we know schools right now are closed to outside volunteers? Any ideas on how, parents and volunteers can engage in this process?
Through electronic correspondence, you could send out, notices, and maybe something to a parent could reinforce emotional learning, upstairs, downstairs brain. Again, we are using these techniques to hold kids accountable. Sometimes we're still talking to them about attendance, talking to them about grades, but when they're doing it in a a setting where they are not feeling the shaming or the blaming, then oftentimes that's where the child understands that, connects the dots that some of those behaviors are being driven by navigating things away from school, and really school is helping to bring that back online. So I think some of the things as you're making your journey to become more trauma sensitive is to communicate these things with the parents as well. One of the community schools social workers over in Bristol that was actually works at Dr. Mabe's school, man, she started a parent honor roll program, because when she first started there was about a 20% parent participation, and just through some simple things she started to do, it raised it up over a year to 80% participation of parents. So use whatever mechanisms that you're using during COVID-19, and begin in bite-sized amounts to, start sharing this with the caregivers or telling about changes. We're creating calming rooms, share my little slide about emotional regulation, and, some of those things could help.
Okay, the last question that I'm seeing, unless I've completely missed something, how do you get community leaders on board with creating trauma-sensitive schools? So people who are outside of the school system.
Well, I've worked with schools from both ways, from the superintendent down and from teachers up. And one thing, I was working with a group in North Carolina, and the leaders that got a grant to bring in some training and all, they were a bit discouraged that they couldn't get the leadership to the table. And I said, here's what we do. And this is a lot of what happened in the region where I'm at, is we just kept holding trainings like the one you've attended today. And then you begin to get teachers that are like, wow, this was something I felt was very important, talking to their counselors about it, talking to their principals about it. And I can promise you, if we can't get the ear of the superintendent, their principals can. And so kind of work from both ways. Certainly you're going to see change, probably more graphically when you do have the buy-in from the superintendent. I've been really pleased to work with 8 entire school districts that I was working with at the superintendent level. But if you get a bunch of teachers fired up and begin to implement this, and their principals, there's going to be those meetings with principals and superintendents, and they're going to say, you know what, we had a workshop and we're doing this and this and this. Could we offer it? That kind of a thing. So work it from both ways.
Becky, what was the quote, when children are blank, it's our job to bring calm?
Chaos and calm, upstairs and downstairs. Calm is upstairs, chaos is downstairs. So when children are chaotic, we need to not be chaotic ourselves. We need to share our calm. And remember the little slide that said, you are safe, I am with you. So think about walking in the elevator, you're in the basement, you are safe, I'm here with you. Now let's solve that problem. Move them up the brain.
Last question was referring to how can an agency that works to house homeless families best utilize this information?
A agency that like
works to house homeless families. Yes.
Well, I mean, I do trainings as well for, housing authorities, homeless shelters, and for your staff. One housing authority regionally that we did training for, trained all the maintenance, all the office workers, and it just helps people to understand that much of the behaviors are driven by some outside, circumstance. And some of the people living in 2013, the American Journal of Public Health said that the homeless individuals have the highest ACE score of any other population that's been sampled. And, when I've worked with homeless shelters, I trained all the staff in a huge one in Knoxville, CARM. Actually, Bert Rosen is a good friend of mine, the CEO of CARM, and we've done training down there for all his staff. And some of the staff that were retired bankers that leave banking and go into helping rebuild people's lives in this shelter down there in Carm. They're weeping in the back when they realize the attachment of homeless individuals to the trash bag. The trash bag represents to us, maybe it's dirty, maybe it's got bugs in it or drugs in it, but to that individual, that's their luggage. That's all they've got. And so by bringing this information, I've not found that it won't change any kind of environment that you insert it into.
Thank you, Becky. I think that is all the questions.
Great. Had one more come through and I'm waiting on some clarification. Somebody had asked, how will students learn to be accountable? But I didn't know if they wanted to submit into the chat box a little bit more information about specifically when they're talking about students becoming accountable.
Okay, well, that's a good question. Well, again, trauma informed. So accountability, we still, if a student, you know, the grades are not there, the attendance or whatever, you know, we're utilizing strategies like the choices room or like the calming corner. So there's still the accountability, but we're just doing it in different ways. So we're not taking away, we're not dismissing, you know, children responding violently or grades. But what I have found, the schools that I'm working with, grades begin to improve, attendance begins to improve, but you're just using different strategies to address accountability.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Like I say, be very mindful, and we will get your certificates and CEUs to you just as soon as we can. We have the Tennessee Commission on Children and Youth has Children's Advocacy Days coming up March 9th through the 12th. We'll send out information about that, and we'll hope you will log on to that when we send out your certificates. Thank you all. Have a wonderful weekend. And thank you, Tennessee Suicide Prevention Network, Molly and Rachel especially. Thank you, Christy Paling, Regional Coordinator for the Upper Cumberland Council on Children and Youth, and Jill Stott, the Regional Coordinator for the Northeast Council on Children and Youth in Johnson City, Tennessee. Everyone have a wonderful day, and please stay trauma-informed and mindful of others.